Chair Alcock, we are live.
Okay, thank you. So I think I see everybody. I would like to call this meeting to order and welcome everyone to the hearing. The meeting is being held electronically in accordance with Section 238 of the Municipal Act 2001. The procedures for the meeting are as per the town's procedural bylaw and the electronic meeting protocol during emergencies. I do see that we have quorum and we have one absence today. Councillor Weed won't be joining us today. I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe under the terms of the Robinson-Huron Treaty number 61 of 1850 and the Williams Treaties of 1923. We commit to acknowledge, learn, educate, create opportunity, honor sacred places, and take actions toward real truth and reconciliation in support of our commitment to walking the path together in respect, peace, and harmony for future generations. So thank you for that. And with that, I do have a motion. And with respect to the agenda, it has been moved by Councillor Stone, seconded by Councillor Armour. It is recommended that the Planning Committee agenda dated September 15th, 2021 be hereby adopted as printed and circulated. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you for that. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Okay, seeing none, we are moving right along. I should state right up front that we have a lengthy agenda today. So don't worry, rest assured, I'm sure I'll be calling at least one biological break, just to state that up front. All right, with that, I'd like to move to our invited and ceremonial presentation. And with us today, we have David Riley of the SGL Planning and Design Group, but I am going to ask our Director of Planning to introduce David to the committee and to the public. Over to you, Kirsten. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Alcock. Actually, I will let Richard, the Manager of Planning, do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that favor. And through you, Madam Chair, the report before you addresses release of the draft community planning permit bylaw. Staff and consultants have completed the draft bylaw as a first draft, as described in phase 4 of the work plan for this project. The next step in this phase will be to introduce and present this first draft of the bylaw to stakeholders, the public, and present it at various public events. Staff is recommending that the draft bylaw be received and is seeking direction to circulate the draft bylaw to stakeholders, etc. To support your consideration of the motion, we have invited a representative from SGL Consulting, and it's David Riley. David is a professional planner, and he's going to provide you a presentation of the draft community planning permit bylaw and how we got to this point, and he'll be around to answer any questions you may have. SGL Planning and Design Inc. is the lead consultant working with the town on this project, and you may recall that they were also our consultants throughout the preparation of our current official plan. On a housekeeping note, the schedules associated with the draft bylaw are now online on myhuntsville.ca/CPP bylaw. Additionally, our GIS technician has created an online interactive mapping tool that can be used to review mapping shown on this schedule in a more user-friendly fashion and also provide feedback through that tool. And I can share that with you after David's presentation if you wish. So with your permission, Madam Chair, whenever you're ready, I can turn the floor over to David to give you a presentation.
Thank you for that, Richard. And I'm certainly ready. I do want to make one comment for committee that, as I understand it today, we are basically, you're asking us to go forward with the release of this document for public consultation. So today, well, we have a wonderful opportunity to ask both you and our guest, David Riley, questions generally about the draft. We'll have other opportunities to really sink into it and to get into the full detail. Today, you're looking for that general direction. Can we release it to the public? Are there outstanding issues that you think that maybe are covered or shouldn't be covered or whatever? So that's my understanding of today's request.
You are 100% correct.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I just needed to clarify that for myself, whether or not committee probably got that already, but there we go. Absolutely. I look forward to the presentation. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and hello to everybody and members of Planning Committee and everyone listening in today. My name is David Riley from SGL Planning and Design, and I'm really happy to be here today. I'm joining you from a property on Bird Lake in neighboring Bracebridge. So I'm not quite in Huntsville, but I'm close. I'm close. I asked Richard and Kirsten before this meeting if there was a chance we could meet in person, but I guess we're all not there yet. So I'm coming closer to you guys. So we'll be there soon. If I could ask Richard to please share the presentation, that would be great. Thank you. Excellent. And Richard, if you could move to the next slide, please. And I just wanted to introduce to you, obviously I'm David Riley, but also from SGL, not here today is Paul Lowe's. And then importantly also on the consulting team is Dylan Consulting. And we've got Justine, Annie, and Daniel, and some of you may be familiar with them in some of the public consultation or stakeholder consultation work that we've done, and we'll continue to do. So I just wanted to remind everyone that I'm part of a broader team. Next slide, please, Richard. And where we're at in the process here is we've gone through phases 1 to 3, and we're in phase 4, which is the actual bylaw preparation. So as mentioned, this is the first draft of the bylaw that's released for public comments. And after this, we'll be having more public consultation, more stakeholder consultation, coming back with a second draft of the bylaw, having more consultation on that, and then preparing the final for approval. So there's definitely lots of chance to be heard, and we definitely want that feedback. Next slide, please. Oh, there it is, animating that slide. Perfect. So just quickly, I wanted to just provide a quick refresher and overview of the key benefits of a community planning permit system. So generally, it combines zoning, site plan, minor variance into one application and approval process. We can have shorter approval timelines within 45 days. It allows a municipality to impose certain conditions of development that benefit the community. And also it adds predictability to the process for the community, as well as landowners and developers, and generally a more stable planning vision for the municipality with no third-party appeals. Next slide, please. So this is table 1 on page 5 of the draft bylaw, and I won't read this in detail during this presentation, but we just wanted to highlight that this is an important table as it provides really a succinct overview of what a community planning permit system is. And I'll be going through all of these items during the presentation. The one thing that I did want to highlight off the bat is the term precinct. So the term precinct is what we're using to describe the areas that we would refer to as zones within the existing zoning bylaw. So within our community planning permit bylaw, we're calling those precincts. Next slide, please. And this is a visual that Planning Committee and the public may be familiar with already, as we had included it in our background and directions report. But this really, it's also in the bylaw itself, but it provides a simplified view of how the community planning permit bylaw combines multiple steps into one process as compared to the status quo process in place today. So if you look at the top of the top half under traditional process, this is the status quo. And you see kind of a colored box around zoning bylaw, minor variance, site alteration permit, site plan application, and tree removal permit. Basically, all of those things get combined into one process of community planning permit within the CPP process. So this is just a simplified view of how we think things are streamlined and simplified through this new process. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we started with the background review, and then we, that included a review of best practices, official plan, zoning bylaw. We reviewed minor variants and previous zoning applications. We developed a key directions for Huntsville, and this is our background and directions report. And now here we are, the first draft of the CPP bylaw. And so I'd like to start taking you through the various sections of the bylaw, and I will be brief as possible. So if you could go to the next slide, please, Richard. Starting with section 1, explanatory notes and context. This is really setting out the basis for the CPP bylaw, and it provides an overview of the community planning permit system. And what we've added is a section called how to read this bylaw. So this includes a summary of each section of the bylaw, but also we think adds to the readability and implementation and interpretation of the bylaw. We've included a step-by-step guide for users on how to interpret and read the bylaw. Next slide, please. So here we are, section 2, which is the administration section of the bylaw. So this section sets out the structure and the administrative procedures of the bylaw, such as when a CPP, so when I say CPP, that's community planning permit, when a CPP permit is required. It establishes the classes of the planning permits and the process for considering variations to the provisions. It also sets out a process for provisional approvals, and it sets out what's exempted from a community planning permit. So we're going to dive in a little bit deeper into all of these matters now. So if you could go to the next slide, please, Richard. So first, let's talk about the classes, and these will make a little bit more sense as we go through, but generally there's 3 permit classes. So a class 1 permit is when all development standards are met. So if you're coming in for a new dwelling on a property and you meet all of the lot requirements, minimum lot size, lot coverage, setbacks, height, etc., you can move forward without kind of a bit of a longer process, and the approval is delegated to staff. A class 2 permit is when you need variations to some of those bylaw requirements, or if vegetation removal is proposed. And the variations are only up to a certain threshold of variation, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But again, a class 2 permit is also approved by staff. And a class 3 permit is when council variations are required. So these are more than what we would consider minor variations to the bylaw. And in this case, approval by council is required. So now we'll get into a little bit more about variations and what does this mean exactly. So next slide, please. So we've got class 2 and class 3 variations. And the bylaw establishes the threshold for what would be considered a class 2 or a class 3 variation. So for example, if you're looking at the lot requirement standards for a specific precinct, so residential, urban shoreline precinct, for example, and you were proposing a reduction in the minimum required side yard setback, the table in the bylaw itself establishes a maximum threshold for a reduction for a class 2 variation to that side yard setback. For example, a 20% reduction. So if the side yard setback was being reduced by less than 20%, that would be a class 2 variation. But if it was being reduced by more than 20% of the standard, that would be a class 3 variation, which would be a council variation. So importantly, the bylaw also establishes criteria for considering variations. So how do we assess whether this variation is appropriate? So the bylaw actually includes that criteria within it. So this will be important to evaluate all permit applications, and really we think is a useful tool for all decision makers. So planning committee, staff, anyone really using the bylaw. Next slide, please. And in terms of this criteria, here's a couple examples of some of those criteria for considering variations, including that the proposal is appropriate for the lands, takes into account the unique characteristics of the property, and is compatible with surrounding land uses, or that the proposal is consistent with the provisions of the bylaw and applicable policy documents, such as the town's official plan. As well as the proposal creates no adverse impacts or demonstrates measures to avoid or mitigate the adverse impact. So for instance, if you were proposing a reduced side yard, for example, well, maybe one of the ways to mitigate that is to provide for appropriate landscaping to have that appropriate interface between two properties, just as an example. Next slide, please. And so section 2.12 of the bylaw includes really a step-by-step process for planning permits by class. And I'll just kind of zoom into each section here. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Step 1 is really the pre-consultation stage of the process. So pre-consultation meeting happens with town staff and other relevant review agencies. So this could be MTO, it could be the district. After this meeting, a checklist is prepared listing all of the submission requirements that would form part of a complete application. And staff also determine which permit class is applicable based on the proposal. So the applicant would know in step 1, is this a class 1, 2, or 3 permit? So now in step 2, on the next slide, this is the application submission. So starting with the submission of the application, where the applicant submits all of the required plans and studies as identified on the checklist, the application is then circulated to the agencies and departments for comment. And once all the comments are received and comments that the required and confirmation that the checklist items have all been submitted, then the application is deemed complete. So all comments are received, then we have a complete application. For class 1, there's no notification required since there's really no variations to bylaw standards. For class 2 and 3, notification is required. So for class 2, staff prepare the notice, post it on the town's website, and the applicant will post a sign on the property. And any concerned individuals can submit comments within 15 days. In class 3, the same notification process as class 2 is followed, with the added requirement to notify all property owners within 120 meters of the subject property by mail. So what we've tried to do here is, given that there's no third-party appeal, so only the applicant can appeal a decision, we really do want to make sure that people have the opportunity to comment on community planning permit applications, similar to what they can do today. So this is really setting out that process. The next slide, we're in step 3. This is the application review stage. So for class 1, if there's no significant issues raised, then the application can be proceed to a decision. And if there's no concerns, if there are concerns, then these can be discussed with the applicant and any revisions can be made. In class 2, if there's no significant issues raised, then the application also can proceed to a decision. And again, this is a town staff decision. And if there are significant issues, there is an option to bump up the application to a class 3 council variation. And this bump up can happen by staff or by council. For class 3, the application is forwarded to council for a decision. Again, and of course, starting with a presentation to planning committee. And then step 4, the decision itself on the next slide. we're either looking at a decision that's approved, provisionally approved, or refused. And I'll explain provisional approvals a little bit on the next slide. But if approved, there might be a requirement for an agreement to be registered on title, similar to any site plan agreement that you might be familiar with now, as well as a building permit. A building permit won't always be required, but it may be with some applications. So if refused, then the applicant may appeal the decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal. And if provisionally approved, this means that the applicant will need to fulfill certain conditions prior to final approval. And now let's talk a little bit about what that means. Next slide, please. So provisional approvals, what this is really the bylaw is setting out a process by which an application can be approved based on certain conditions. So it's subject to certain conditions of approval being met within 1 year of the provisional approval being granted. So, for example, staff may grant provisional approval for a permit application. Say it was a deck on the side of a commercial operation for the purposes of a patio, for example. And they may grant provisional approval subject to the submission of a landscape plan or another study or a plan that is deemed satisfactory to town staff. And section 212.6 of the bylaw lists a number of potential conditions that the town may impose through provisional approval. So it's not limited to those, but we wanted to give people an understanding of what some of these conditions would be. Next slide, please, Richard. So the CPP bylaw also sets out certain types of development that do not require a community planning permit. So this would include interior renovations, provided that there's no change in use, of course, minor repairs, maintenance, and replacement on properties, vegetation removal in some cases. So if it's associated with forestry operations, or vegetation removal is proposed in a rural precinct outside of natural heritage features, etc. That does not require a community planning permit. Seasonal water structures, agricultural uses and buildings in the rural precinct, as long as minimum distance separation is met, as well as single detached dwellings located outside of the waterfront precincts. This is just an example of some of the things that are exempt that I wanted to highlight. Next slide, please. And so now that wraps up section 2. And section 3 is the definition section. And generally, we've carried forward the definitions from the existing zoning bylaw, but we have made some additions and clarifications where appropriate, such as new definitions for natural features within the town's natural heritage system. We wanted to make sure that we had consistent definitions between the official plan and the community planning permit bylaw. We've also updated various dwelling definitions. So we've added another type of townhouse, which is a block townhouse. So this would be a condominium development, not a common element condominium development, but where a homeowner would own the unit itself within all of the land would be owned by the condominium. So this is just another example of built form that we do see examples in Huntsville, and we want to reflect that in the bylaw. We've also clarified and improved certain definitions, for example, floor area, and just wanted to provide clarification as it relates to some other uses that it may not have been clear. Next slide, please. So now we're into section 4, the general provisions. And section 4 contains general provisions that are applicable to all precincts within Huntsville, and they address matters such as setbacks from watercourses or regulations for specific uses that are permitted within many precincts, and regulations related to vegetation removal and site alteration, among many other matters. And generally, we've carried forward the provisions from the existing zoning bylaw where we could, and we have updated and simplified provisions where appropriate. So you've heard me say that a few times. We really wanted to use the bylaw as a basis. This is what people know. This is what works in Huntsville. It's a great base bylaw, but of course we're needing to make changes to it and altering it to be this new process, community planning permit process. So you will see a lot of the things that you do see in the existing zoning bylaw carried forward. But I did want to highlight a few other new things that have been included within this section on general provisions. So if you could go to the next slide, please. First of all, you can also vary a general provision. So what we've said was that unless otherwise noted, so sometimes in the general provisions you say this is a class 3 variation, but unless otherwise noted, variations to any general provision within section 4 would be a class 2 community planning permit application. So staff approval. Discretionary uses. So the bylaw, this is something new, and the bylaw sets out certain uses that may be permitted subject to applicable criteria. So if you're looking at the permitted uses tables in section 6 of the bylaw, you'll see another column now that says whether it's discretionary or not. So if it's discretionary, it's to the town's discretion of whether it should be permitted or not. And the bylaw directs town staff to look at that in the context of other sections of the bylaw. And that's the section on conditions, provisional approvals, and criteria for considering variations. So it's really just a way to say, yes, we may want to have a bed and breakfast establishment in this precinct. However, we just need to think about it and consider these things. And yes, it may be permitted. So that's what discretionary uses is. Next slide, please. So there's a new section, which was not in the current zoning bylaw, and this is on vegetation removal and site alteration. So a CPP permit would be required for vegetation removal within 30 meters of any shoreline within an urban shoreline or waterfront designation, or vegetation removal within woodlands that are greater than 0.5 hectares in size and within or adjacent to the natural heritage system. So the provisions of the section don't apply, as I mentioned when I was talking about exemptions, to forestry operations, licensed aggregate operations, or approved public works. And also the removal of vegetation where it's not defined as a tree doesn't require a permit. And we've added a definition for tree in the bylaw to clarify what that would be. And so conditions may be added to a community planning permit to minimize the extent of site grading and alteration. And this could include requirements for stormwater management or restricting site alteration in areas of steep slopes, etc. Next slide, please. We've also included some new provisions for secondary residential dwelling units within separate detached accessory buildings. And this is really looking at within the urban areas. We wanted to provide a little bit more regulation in terms of what these could look like. And so we've specified you can be 8 meters, a maximum gross floor area of 75 square meters, 8 meters within the rural precinct, but 6 meters if you're within another precinct, because we want to make sure that the heights are compatible. Minimum setbacks, you want to make sure that you have that minimum setback from side and rear lot lines to provide for adequate separation distance, but also amenity space for the secondary residential dwelling unit if it's within a detached structure. And also making sure that there's enough space between the accessory structure and the main dwelling on the property. We've suggested 5.5 meters, which would allow for that separation, but also amenity space related to for the main dwelling. Next slide, please. We're moving on to section 5, and section 5 is really carrying over many of the parking and loading requirements that apply within the existing zoning now, and so they'll apply to all precincts in Huntsville, including minimum number of parking and loading spaces, as well as minimum dimensions, and things like that. So largely carried over from the existing bylaw with some updates. An example of one update we did was requiring for parking lots that have more than 20 parking spaces, just making sure that there's enough space for an entrance and exit within those driveway openings. We've heard that there's some examples where there's sometimes conflict between cars entering and exiting some parking lots. So this is just an example of one of the changes that we've made. And now we're moving on to where a lot of the details are within the bylaw. And this is section 6, which contains really all of the detail with respect to permitted uses and lot standards for the various precincts. So starting with the existing zones as a base, we've really, we touched on this in the last presentation we did to Planning Committee, but we've really simplified the number of zones to create fewer precincts. And these precincts are in conformity with the official plan land use designations. Next slide, please. So on these next few slides that you'll see 2 columns with the new precinct on the left-hand side and the various zones that have been incorporated within each precinct on the right-hand side. So there was some overlap between which zones would be incorporated into which precincts. And this is where we really tried to line things up with the OP designation. So you can see here, for example, in the residential precincts, C1 and R1 appear within many of these. Well, that's because that zone actually applied within all of these various areas. And so we wanted to make sure that we took some of the provisions from those zones, but applied them appropriately to the precincts. So the C1 zone, for example, is the convenience commercial, and that's permitted if you're looking at the official plan within residential land use designations. So we wanted to incorporate that permission within the residential precincts. Next slide, please. Here we have commercial precincts. So we've got one commercial precinct, regional commercial, and the former zones there. We've really, for mixed use precincts, we've really tried to simplify things and wanted to combine the urban mixed use former zones into one precinct, while still recognizing the central business district as a separate precinct. So we have done that because there is really a different character and zone standard or precinct standards that would apply there. And also community mixed use for the community settlement areas. Really that's just showing up in Port Sydney. Next slide, please. And then with the employment precincts, we still wanted to distinguish between urban business employment and community business employment, community again referring to Port Sydney, and still keeping that heavy employment separate precinct. Open space, combine the open space zones, but still keeping institutional separate from that. Next slide, please. And then rural, having rural residential, rural extractive, and hidden valley, 2 precincts, so recreational resort residential and resort commercial. Next slide, please. And then still having what's the existing conservation zone is the conservation precinct, but then there's also an overlay that I need to discuss. So overlays are showing up on all the land use schedule or on all of the CPP bylaw schedules. And we've got the natural constraints overlay and then various flood zone or overlays. This is based on existing mapping and it is also reflected within the official plan. But really the natural constraints overlay is a way for us to recognize that within the official plan, all of these features have been identified. We wanted to carry those over into the CPP bylaw so that underlying you might be rural or urban shoreline residential, but you may have an overlay of a natural constraint or a flood zone overlay. And what this will do is it'll trigger separate provisions that would also apply in addition to those underlying precinct categories. So it's a way to make sure that we are capturing within the CPP bylaw all of those important natural constraints and flood overlays that do exist. Next slide, please. So really, when you're looking at each precinct within the bylaw, you have permitted uses, permitted accessory uses, and lot requirements. And also you'll have discretionary uses and the class 2 variation limits that are specified within the table. So let's just look at how this shows up in section 6. So you can see here, for example, here's a snapshot of permitted uses within the residential precincts. So you can see on the right-hand side, those uses identified as discretionary, those would be evaluated as permitted uses by staff in accordance with the criteria of the bylaw. So you can see financial establishment and food store. Yes, they're permitted in some of the urban residential designations and community residential, but discretionary. So it might be based on location in relation to where it might be appropriate. So not necessarily in the middle of maybe a bunch of single residential dwellings, but maybe closer to where there might be existing commercial uses, something like that. Next slide, please. Here's a snapshot of accessory uses that are permitted within the residential precincts. So pretty self-explanatory and similar to how it's what's structured in the bylaw today. Next slide, please. And this is showing for lot requirements. So these are presented in a table format. So you can see here minimum lot frontage, lot coverage, et cetera. And you can see on the right-hand side, there's information about class 2 variation limits. So for example, if an application was proposing to increase the maximum lot coverage within the regional commercial precinct, a variation of up to 20% from the bylaw requirement would be considered a class 2 variation, which is a staff approval. But anything beyond that would be a class 3 variation, considering which would require council approval. So that's really how the class 2 variation limits are working. Next slide, please. Just wanted to show what some of the schedules look like here. And this was a real collaborative effort between the consulting team and town staff to prepare these schedules. But we really wanted to prepare a comprehensive set of schedules that were organized in a grid system. So these are really going to be something that you can print and know exactly where it is and what schedule your property is on. You can see that the grid in kind of the top right of each page, and an example of what grid, where it's highlighted on that sheet on the top right. This is the grid that we're looking at, and it shows all the properties within that area. So that key map shows up on all schedules, and it shows all the precincts. And you can see in these examples some of those overlays that we were talking about in terms of natural constraints. Next slide, please. And I don't think at this point I'll go through this scenario, but if anyone wanted to refer back to this presentation in more detail, this is just a little bit of a scenario that shows a comparison at the top of what the current system is in terms of having to deal with separate zoning bylaw, maybe site plan applications or a minor variance application, compared to the new CPP system on the bottom line. So just an example of what a simplified process looks like in the case of John here, who would want to expand his commercial business. Next slide, please. And just wanted to finalize the presentation by just kind of showing what the next steps are. And of course, we're excited that and hoping that the bylaw will be released to the public for comment, so we can continue on with our work plan, which includes stakeholder meetings, a public open house, a public meeting, and then further revisions to the bylaw, followed by another public meeting, and then preparing the final bylaw before approval. So next slide. I'm happy to have had a chance to provide this presentation to you today. I know that was a lot to cover, and I appreciate the extra time that you gave to me today. But I did think it was important to take everyone through in a little bit of detail the new bylaw, as it's a lot to digest. But we're pretty happy with it, and we're pretty excited to hear the feedback and ideas and comments that everyone has. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David. That was a great presentation. And just before I turn it over to committee for questions, I am going to read the motion that's before us, so everyone has that in mind. And so it has been moved by Councillor Armour, seconded by Councillor Stone. It is recommended that Report Development 2021-102 Draft Community Planning Permit Bylaw be received, and that staff be authorized to circulate the draft community planning permit bylaw to stakeholders, agencies, and the public to commence public engagement and community input, including a statutory public meeting as part of phase 4 of the work plan contained in attachment number 1 to Report Development 2020-99. So with that, I will ask if there are questions from committee. It was a thorough presentation. Yes, Mayor Terziano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, David, for that presentation. I have one fairly easy question and then a comment, but my question first, you mentioned at one point in there that staff or council could bump up a class 2 approval to a class 3 or get council involved, I guess. My question is, can the applicant bump it up to a council approval if they don't feel that they're getting the answers they want from staff, I guess?
Through you, Madam Chair, if I could just quickly answer that question. I would think that the request could be made, certainly, by the applicant. And I think that would probably be, there would probably be 2 reasons when council bumps it up. It's probably either when they're hearing a lot of comments from many members of the community where, oh, there's a lot of concerns here, maybe we need to look at this. Or there might be a request made specifically from the applicant to either staff or council. And I think that that request could be made at any time. And I still think it would be up to council or staff to make the decision of whether it gets bumped up at that time. But certainly the request could be made.
Okay. And if I might, just my comment, I went through the draft bylaw and fairly quickly. So this presentation was extremely helpful. And I wonder if when we put the draft bylaw on I take it it'll go on our Engage site or somewhere, can we pull this presentation out of our minutes and get it on there? Because I think it really helps if you are looking at the bylaw that the presentation could be, the video part of it could be there as well. Thank you.
That's a great comment. I'm sure that can be done. David, Director Maxwell, I see a nod. Yes, that's a definite yes. Before I make a comment or questions, are there any others on committee? While you're thinking, I'm going to throw a question out, if I may. I had a cursory look as well, and on section 2.1221, it is the study requirements section. And I get the very fact that it says the following materials and technical reports may be required. And I get it that clearly not every application will have to follow 2 pages of possible technical reports. This is really our opportunity, is it not, where everything that we think we need to be covering will be covered here. You know, when we talk about our issues around, let's say, noise and vibration, it gets thrown here. When we have issues around urban design, it gets thrown in here. So basically, this is a really critical piece of the permit process. But to assuage any fears out in the public, we're not asking every applicant to abide by all of these study requirements. I know that's an obvious question, but I just sort of wanted to make that point and have it confirmed.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, that is absolutely correct. It would be certainly if there was a matter related to noise and vibration, so a development was next to a railroad, for example, that would be a study requirement, but it would not be a study requirement in many cases. It would have to be reasonable, and certainly in many cases, there would be no study requirements. You know, if you're dealing with just a deck expansion, or I'm thinking something that might be very common here, you know, there wouldn't be really anything other than plans required. But one of the things is we've added a term, a technical report, which we think is something that covers off a lot of different disciplines where there might be a need to have a further study. So we did want to have that in there. But yes, you're right. Not looking for all of these for most applications, that's for sure.
You know, I really appreciate that response. It's just that there were a number of study areas that I had not seen before, such as a salt management plan. And given our new, you know, from the district's perspective and salt management, all of that, that's a really important area. It's new to me to see it in something like this, or a boating impact study. So things like that, that's new. And I think as long as the public understands this is very, you know, clearly we're not asking for all of this in every application. As I said, it's obvious, but I just wanted to state that. And so I did have a question, if I may, and that was, I'm wondering, David, with your experience elsewhere on community planning permit systems, do you have any idea what the anticipated expectation with respect to the percentage of applications that only require approval from staff versus being bumped up to council? And do we, like, I think one of the goals here is to have a more efficient approvals process. That was stated up front. So I'm just wondering if you have any insight for us as to how it's worked elsewhere as to the division of approvals.
Through you, Madam Chair, that's actually a great question. And I don't have that answer for you today, unfortunately, but
It's okay.
Through this process, fortunately, we've had really great conversations with other municipalities, including your neighbor, Lake of Bays, who have been very, very helpful in providing advice and just notes on their experience in implementing a bylaw. And Lake of Bays is still in the process of finalizing their draft town-wide bylaw. But this specific question, I don't think it was something that we've discussed with them, but certainly I could look into that. And I would think that some of the revisions that we might be looking at between the first and second drafts of this bylaw might be related to those specifics. So if maybe we've noted a 20% variation on a standard that really could be more like 50% versus, you know, in terms of class 2 to class 3, depending on what it is. So we're really looking to hear some of that feedback once people start to digest this and look at it further. But it's a great question, and I will definitely put it out there.
Right. Thanks for that. I really appreciate it. And last comment, I just wanted to say I really love the new precinct model. To me, it seems much less complicated. And anything that makes planning much less complicated is a really terrific thing. So I can see Councillor Stone maybe agreeing with me on that one. I don't know. So thank you for that. Are there any other questions from committee? Or shall we pull the trigger and call the vote? We'll call the vote. All those in favor? All right. And that's approved unanimously. David, thank you so much for your presentation. And
thank you all very much.
Consultation. That's great.
Thanks very much, everyone. Have a nice day. And
thank you to our staff as well for working so hard on getting it to this point. It's been a huge process. So thank you, Director Maxwell and Manager Clark. All right. With that, I think unless I see a show of hands, it's too soon for a biological break, right? We can plow on? Okay, good. All right, T. So at this point, I'd like to welcome everyone to the public portion of the meeting to consider applications to amend zoning bylaw 2008-66P pursuant to section 34 of the Planning Act. The procedure of the public meeting will be as follows. A brief explanation of the purpose and effect of the application and any correspondence received to date will be given by staff. The applicant or their representative will be asked to provide any additional comments without repeating the information already outlined by staff. Any members of the public present will then be permitted to ask questions or provide comments respecting these applications. Committee will then have the opportunity to question the applicant, the planner, or anyone giving presentations. Once the public meeting is concluded, the input received and proposed amendments will be considered by committee and council. Any persons making representation are requested to first state their name and mailing address. Please note that the presentations are limited to 10 minutes. Please also be informed that an appellant must provide an oral submission at the public meeting or written submission prior to the passage of the zoning bylaw. Otherwise, the local planning appeal tribunal may dismiss the appeal. If you wish to be notified of the passage of a zoning bylaw, you must file either with the recording secretary or with the clerk a written request for notification prior to the passage of the proposed zoning bylaw. Each notice of complete application and public meeting included an explanation of the purpose and effect of the proposed amendment, and notice was required to be posted at the subject lands. Notice was therefore considered to have been provided in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act and applicable sections of the Huntsville Official Plan. So with that, we'd like to start with application Z12-2021, Zern and Pfeffergerad at 161 Wilson Drive. And I believe, Richard, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just start sharing my screen. So the subject property is located at 161 Wilson Drive, and it fronts onto Lake Vernon. The lot has an irregular shape and is constrained by Lake Vernon to the north and the Canadian National Railway to the south. The property has an area of approximately 1,459 meters squared with 98.4 meters of frontage on Lake Vernon. The lot is currently zoned Shoreline Residential 1 and is designated waterfront in the official plan. The applicant intends to construct a 176 meter square single detached dwelling with a 60 meter square attached deck to replace the pre-existing legal non-complying dwelling and deck, which had been damaged in a fire. The applicant also proposes to remove several shoreline structures to the east of the proposed new dwelling. So I'll just point those out. It should be noted that a minor variance application was approved for the lot in 1988, which authorized the dwelling to be constructed within 8 meters of the shoreline frontage. And you can see the outline of the previous dwelling and its deck underneath the proposed new dwelling on this sketch. To facilitate this development, the application requests a rezoning of the lot from a Shoreline Residential 1 zone to a Shoreline Residential 1 zone with exception to permit a primary lot coverage of 16.3% and a maximum accessory lot coverage of 5.1%. To reduce the rear yard setback from 10 meters to 4.31, and this is the rear yard setback for the single detached dwelling. Reduce the westerly side yard setback from 6 meters to 2 meters for the dwelling. Reduce the front yard setback from 8 meters to 6.91 meters for the dwelling. And reduce the front yard setback from 8 meters to 5.1 meters for the deck. and also to allow a septic system leaching bed within 30 meters of the shoreline for an enhanced treatment system only. As noted, the property is constrained. Natural constraints include deer wintering habitat, cold water lake, lake trout habitat, steep slopes, and flood-prone lands. Human constraints include the CN line to the south. The proposal is for a comparatively larger dwelling that maintains previously existing setbacks to the CN line and also moves the dwelling further away from the nearest neighbor to the west. However, the dwelling and deck would encroach further into the front yard by approximately 2 meters than had previously been the case. Despite this encroachment, the selected building location represents the most appropriate location on this irregularly shaped lot, given the lot width in this area and the previously disturbed nature. As the proposal includes the removal of several non-complying detached accessory structures within 15 meters of Lake Vernon, including a portion of a dock sited parallel to the shoreline, a private cabin with associated deck, and a shed, the proposal will also consolidate the dispersed shoreline structures and development on site to the previously cleared area behind the boathouse, leaving space for shoreline revegetation and establishment of an improved shoreline buffer in other previously disturbed areas. The proposal also results in a reduced overall lot coverage, bringing the property more in line with the character of the surrounding shoreline development. A setback of 30 meters is typically required from a cold water lake under the official plan, particularly those identified as containing lake trout habitat. However, in certain circumstances where it can be justified, such as where a lot depth is insufficient or site constraints exist, the official plan does allow for a lesser setback. As a condition of approval for a lesser setback, policies require proponents to implement compensating measures designed to sustain or enhance the integrity of the shoreline area, including upgrading or installing tertiary sewage treatment systems, revegetating an area equivalent to the area of the encroachment, or other measures where the result would be an overall net improvement. A report was prepared by Hutchison Environmental Solutions in support of this application and recommended appropriate compensating measures. So one of the things that was identified in that report is a shoreline revegetation area on either side of the dwelling to establish an appropriate shoreline buffer. And I believe the total area of the revegetation would be 217 square meters. Oops. Here are some renderings of the proposed structure. So this is from the north side, or sorry, the south side. And this is from the north side or the shoreline side. Some photos of the property. So you can see looking east is where the footprint of the fire damaged dwelling and remains are. Closer look here. This is the boathouse that will be kept, along with the associated dock on either side of it. This is a shot looking at where the new dwelling would be. These are the shoreline structures that are being dismantled right now and will be removed. And this is the other side of the boathouse. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act and to the Lake Vernon Association. The Lake Vernon Association provided written comments and noted several concerns with the scale and nature of the development proposed, and their comments are attached to the report as attachment number 6. It should be noted that the association identifies their significant concerns with the current application and requested that the committee cautiously consider it. The association was circulated the site assessment that I referred to earlier to attempt to address some aspects of their comments, but they notified me that their concerns remain. I should clarify, I did refer to that site assessment as being prepared by Hutchinson Environmental, and it's not actually. It was prepared by Riverstone Environmental Solutions, so I apologize. There were also 2 letters of support that were received following the publication of the agenda, and those were forwarded to the committee this morning. CN provided comments in response to this application, and their concerns related to exacerbating potential incompatible development situations, and recommended that the reconstruction conserve the existing setback for the proposed dune building. So whatever was existing, they wanted to make sure that continued. And the proponent did address that concern. Additionally, they recommended a 1.83 meter high chain link fence along the common property boundary. And they also identified several noise mitigation measures that could be implemented during the construction of the buildings to be addressed at the building permit stage. Building staff identified concerns with respect to on-site septic systems, noting whatever is going to be constructed needs to be the exact same size and location as previously existed, given Ontario Building Code requirements relating to clearances from water bodies. To address this requirement, the number of bedrooms and fixtures would need to be capped appropriately, and the proponent has agreed to do that. The application appears to conform with the policies of the town official plan and can be consistent with the provincial policy statement. Therefore, staff are recommending approval, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you for that, Richard. So at this point, I would call upon the applicant or their representative to provide any additional comments.
The applicant or their representative are reminded to use the raised hand button or press *9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address the committee. And Chair Alcock, I can confirm we do have one hand raised, so I will bring them into the meeting now. Please note that during the transition, your video panel will be momentarily interrupted. Once you've been added to the meeting, your video will appear in the committee member panel. Please have your microphone and video, if possible, turned on before you begin speaking, and please confirm your name and mailing address.
Thanks, Sam.
Good afternoon, John P. Gallagher, 24 Hibbard Road, Huntsville, P1H 1C9. And also here who will speak after me is one of the owners, Sean Stern. I think Richard outlined the application well. There are a number of points that I wanted to address. So I'll just jump right into it because I understand the time is tight. What we tried to do, we met with staff early on in the process, and we've had several iterations of the proposal to basically come up with a plan for the redevelopment of the site. My clients, unfortunately, had lost their cottage due to a fire, and it was quite devastating for them. And so they're trying to come and now redo something more appropriate for the site. As Richard stated, this is a one-story walkout, and we're looking at building in the same general location as the existing cottage. Part of the proposal removes a significant amount of structures on site, thereby allowing a decrease in the overall density. And that includes the bunkie, the shed, the deck, and the eastern portion of the dock. Creative engineering and design came up with the plan and shows all the setbacks, etc., as well as the elevations. The owners are proposing the SR1 zone with exceptions, and Richard has gone through those, so I won't go into any great detail on that. As part of the proposal, We had a couple of items that we were tasked with. First was to get a fisheries assessment prepared. And secondly was to take a look at the septic system. As you can see by the regular shape of the lot, we've got a significant amount of frontage along the water, but the depth just isn't there. When we're on our western side of the lot, it's just around 30 meters total. Excuse me. With regards to the official plan, the application is a redevelopment of an existing lot that has had a cottage and a boathouse on it for a significant number of years. It is the intent of the OP to support redevelopment of existing lots, and this is considered linear residential development. The land in the location of the old house is fairly level with the road, and the location provides support for the walkout structure. It also has limits on it also limits additional tree removal and altering the grade across the site. The Riverstone report has provided natural species and areas of planting to enhance the shoreline buffers that are not currently on the site. To the rear of the building site, the land actually rises probably about 15, maybe 20 feet up to the rail line in behind it. And the rail line is still a fair distance away. The purpose was to try and keep a low profile and allow the one story to blend in with the natural grade. The height of the dwelling will be well below the requirements of the zoning bylaw and not impact upon the tree line to the rear. A portion of the dock, as you can see on the site plan to the east, is being removed. I think it was about 40 feet or so. We're trying to remove some of the shoreline structure there, and that area is another area that is slated for replanting. The plan also leaves a significant amount of vegetation along the eastern portion of the land. As that area is currently well vegetated with trees, there's going to be no change in there. And my client also plans on providing some additional plantings in the areas of where the buildings have been removed from the site. Staff at one time asked us if we could look at moving the cottage a little bit east and away from the neighbor. It was basically sitting about a half a meter off the western property boundary. And so we've pushed that in 2 meters. And one of the items, just for clarification, Richard said there were 2 letters of support. We submitted 8 letters, and I would bring your attention to the letter from Dr. Hill, who is the immediate area or resident to the west. He's fully supportive of the plan and the development, and hopefully you did get all the letters that were sent on Sunday from Sean to Julie in the planning department. So we did move the cottage a little bit further. The other thing that came out at the last minute was sort of CN was wanting us to maintain the same setback that was currently there. Our first iteration, we tried to pull the building back a little bit further, but CN's adamant that they want that existing setback. So we revised the drawing to meet that requirement. Another positive factor on this is with respect to the septic system, the new design will be bioengineered for phosphorus removal system, and it will replace the older system that was there. Huntsville Building Department has been out with the septic designer builder, and it's my understanding that that issue is now resolved and supported by the building department. The new dwelling will meet the current Ontario Building Code and Fire Code in its construction, and it takes advantage of an existing lot that has been used for a significant amount of time. The purpose of the application was to try and keep the dwelling as far back from the water as possible. And although we show some of the distance as coming close, as we move westerly along the facade of the building, the cottage is further set back from the water. It's not parallel to the exception requested. And the proposed deck was no closer than what currently existed on the lot. The exception on the lot coverage was a decrease over the current coverage of the site. And with the shoreline buffer, we've tried to limit the amount of shoreline structures by reducing the dockage and bringing it to a more reasonable approach. And again, the recommendations of the Riverstone report are to be implemented through the site plan agreement registered on title, and it has a significant amount of natural plantings that will be required. The district has provided their comment and have no objection. Again, I just want to make sure that committee did receive all the letters of support from the neighbors, with particular attention to the Hills comments there. And we did see the comments from the Lake Vernon Association. We still believe that what we're proposing here is going to be an overall benefit to the lake. You know, we have the majority of the site's going to be left natural as it currently is. There's additional planting and a new septic system that's going to deal with any potential phosphorus running into the water. So I think we've sort of met with staff, tried to come up with a plan to replace the burnt down dwelling, and we feel that we've come up with a good application, and we would respectfully ask committee to support this. And I'd be glad to answer any questions, and I think my client wanted to say a few words as well. Thank you. That was no comments.
Thanks, John.
Chair Alcott, I do see one additional hand has been raised. So with your permission, I'll bring that person into the meeting.
Yes, thank you.
As a reminder, please have your microphone and video, if possible, turned on before you can begin speaking, and please confirm your name and mailing address.
Hi, everybody. Sean Stern, Melanie Pfeffergrad, 177B, Dunblane Avenue, Toronto, Ontario, M5M2S6. Thank you for taking the time for hearing us and hearing our plan. We very much appreciate it. Last year, our family suffered a big tragedy in the loss of our cottage by a fire that was a complete surprise and shock to us. Our cottage is obviously, our times at the cottage for our family is very, very important to us, and probably, you know, what we call our happy place. We love Huntsville, and we love our time up there, and we really have spent some excellent memories that we want to continue. We've never built a house before, so in starting the process, we learned how challenging this particular piece of land is, and I want to thank Richard for helping us navigate. He's spent a lot of time with us and talking to us, and has been very, very helpful. And again, I just want to thank him for his time on this and helping us navigate all the obstacles that go along with putting a plan together. We feel we've put a really good plan together. We have our entire street on board that supports us. I believe we're improving the property. We're reducing the actual covered areas. We're putting up more vegetation. We're putting up more natural areas in the property that there were previously. And we respectfully ask that council approves it, that they support it, and we're very eager to get back up there, of course, and continue our wonderful times.
Okay, thank you both for appearing. That's great. I'm assuming that was, you were finished, Sean? Were you? Okay.
Yes, thank you. Unless you guys have any questions.
Well, what I would ask at this point, if you both could stay, as well as you, John, you know that, but if you turn off, if you mute yourselves and turn off your video, that would be great, because at this point, I'm going to ask if there are members of the public who would like to speak to this application.
Members of the public are reminded to use the raise hand button or press *9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address the committee. Chair Alcock, I can confirm there are no hands raised.
Okay, all right, well, that's good. Well, not whatever. Now we can move to the next portion, which is to turn it over to committee for comments or questions. But before I do that, I think I'd like to read the motion that we're considering before us. And so I think Julie's going to put it up on the screen, and I will read. I've got a motion moved by Councillor Armour, seconded by Councillor Stone. It is recommended that Planning Committee approve zoning bylaw amendment Z12-2021 HDE, changing the zoning from a shoreline residential 1 zone to a shoreline residential 1 zone with an exception, to permit a maximum primary lot coverage of 16.3% and a maximum accessory lot coverage of 5.1%, reduce the rear yard setback from 10 meters to 4.31 meters for the single detached dwelling, reduce the westerly side yard setback from 6 meters to 2 meters for the single detached dwelling, reduce the front yard setback from 8 meters to 6.91 meters for the single detached dwelling, reduce the front yard setback from 8 meters to 5.1 meters for the attached deck, and allow a septic system leaching bed within 30 meters of the shoreline for an enhanced treatment system only. And with that, I will see if there are questions from committee with respect to this application. Councillor Armour.
Thank you, Chair Alcock. Through you to Mr. Gallagher. I noticed on the sketch 2, it has the old railway ties that I know are being removed probably, and it says timbers. How close are those timber wall going to be to the waterfront? I couldn't see it on the sketch at all. And have you considered, Muskoka stone or something like that?
Thank you, Councilor Armour. So your question was, how close is the existing railway wall to the water?
Oh, sorry. I would imagine that's going to be removed.
Yes.
Through the construction site. If there's a new wall going in, the timber wall down below that, it says on the sketch 2. Or is that existing also?
I see construction fence. I'm missing that one. Sorry. I've got the retaining wall showing existing, and likely there will be probably some new gradients going through there, with stone being probably the preferred method for retention. There is that change of grade along there, and find that one piece there.
If I may, Richard, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I can comment on that. It's actually not something that we would encourage, a whole bunch of new retaining walls along the shoreline. Even if it is the granite stone that Councillor Armour is referring to. So I think if there is a retaining wall, an existing retaining wall, then that's fine, and it can remain and it can be reconstructed, but we wouldn't want to see new hardscaping in the shoreline buffer area. So if it's there, it's there, and they can reconstruct if there's a problem, but we wouldn't want to see more than what's there now. I'm not sure if that helps, Councillor Armour.
Councillor, oh, sorry, John?
That might be a question for Sean. I see it now on the plan where Councillor Armour is speaking. It's over in between the building and the water. And so maybe Sean could just let us know, A, if that is existing, and that is in that same area that's proposed for planting. So.
Thank you. What I could say is we're not looking to make any new retaining walls. If there's a retaining wall there that is needed to hold up the land, that's, you know, we'd put it there because it would be required. But we're not looking to construct any new retaining walls of any kind. You know, we want to stay away from those for personal aesthetic reasons.
Okay.
There is, I think it's what already exists there. There is at the shoreline, like there is a timber there, like it's just there. It's always been there. If anything, we'll probably try to sturdy it more, you know, like it'll just be replaced by something stronger.
But I'm assuming if it's railway ties, it will be that they will be replaced, right?
Yes.
And we're obviously insisting on that. I'm sure. Okay, that's good. Councillor Armour, are you good? Mayor Terziano?
Thanks, Madam Chair. First off, folks, so sorry that you lost your cottage. Must be very challenging to lose something like that so suddenly and then have to go through a process like this. But hopefully we can get this done for you. I guess my question is, our official plan most definitely supports the redevelopment. Generally, we try to limit it to the same footprint. And so I guess my question is, how much larger is this new structure than what was existing there? And remind me, Richard, if you could, what our overall coverage is generally. We've got the 16.3% for the new building. And what do we generally allow? Is that 10 or is that 15 normally?
So thank you. Good questions for you, Madam Chair. The primary, so it's divided between primary and accessory lot coverage. And the primary lot coverage for a shoreline residential one zone property is 10%. So it's increasing that from 10% to 16.3%. And then for the accessory structures, it's 5%. So it's a little, what they're proposing to maintain is just a little over the 5%, it's 5.1%. In terms of the, I'm not sure if I wrote it down, John might have it, but I guess if memory serves correct, I think coverage on the property, it's in the report, but I think it was 23% combined overall coverage existing before the fire. And then as a result of this proposal, because of the removal of accessory structures, it's being dropped down to 21%. And so basically it's a shift from all of the dispersed accessory structures to a more consolidated primary structure, and achieving a reduced coverage in the process is the way I was kind of thinking about it.
Supplementary?
Yep.
Appreciate that, and I'm quite familiar with the site itself, and I'm not concerned about any of the setbacks because I know the type of lot it is, and I know that where the tracks are back there. But 23% originally would have been non-conforming. As much as we're reducing it, I'm just concerned: are we overbuilding that site by going to 16%? And Richard, I know you talked about capping certain things, and I kind of missed what you talked about. I don't know whether it was like, was it facilities like washrooms that you were talking about agreeable caps to, or?
Yes, that is right. So one of the things the size of the septic system is going to be an issue on a property like this because technically septic systems have to be 15 meters away from a water body. But the existing situation on this lot is that it's, I believe, closer than 15 meters. So the cap that I was referring to deals with the number of bedrooms and the number of fixtures, and it has to maintain the same size of septic system and the same location. So those are the caps that building would have to enforce, and I believe they've been discussed with the proponent, and the floor plan has been revised accordingly.
Sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, so really the actual living space is not going to be any greater when we're talking about bedrooms and washrooms than the original structure was, or the septic wouldn't support it. Is that fair enough to say?
Yeah, that's correct. So the number of bedrooms, the living space, I mean, maybe John could clarify, but that's my understanding is it's kind of a wash because the septic system is kind of the controlling factor.
Okay, John.
That is correct. When they were dealing with the septic prior to us, or while we were in the process of the circulation, the original plan had come in at 4 bedrooms. And when they reviewed the septic, Chris Nagy had said that basically you have to go back to what was previously allowed on the site in order to replace the septic system in the location that it currently was. Because we do have this setback issue that wasn't there when it was originally built, which is now 30 meters. And so that worked around having to revise the plan to drop it back to a 3-bedroom cottage with the same amount of fixture units. However, number one, you're getting the better system. So you're now getting a phosphorus removal system. And part of the increase in the dwelling was to remove buildings scattered throughout the property and keep it more concise into one structure. Thanks.
And thank you for that. So in essence, we're getting a better and more efficient septic system through this project, right? Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions from committee with respect to this? Okay. Okay. So Councillor Stone, followed by Councillor Armour.
Yeah. So I just want to say that I agree with the Lake Association. I think it's too big for the site, too close to the water, the septic system too close to the water. Yes, we're getting a better septic system. And I will probably reluctantly.
Uh-oh, Councillor Stone, you froze for 1 second. Just after you said reluctantly, you froze for a second. Sorry, unless that was purposeful.
So no, it wasn't. I will be reluctantly going along with this because staff seems to be confident that it's okay, but I would have preferred the original size of the building. But staff can get their heads around it. So I'm going to, as I said, reluctantly go along with it.
Thank you for that. Councillor Armour?
Thank you, Chair. So just a quick, is this going to be a 4-season or just a 3-season building?
John?
I believe it's going to be meeting the requirements of a 4-season dwelling. It's a significant investment that my clients have to do, so they want to do it right. And it seems to be what's happened all along that Wilson Drive. There's been a number of rezonings and minor variances to allow redevelopments of those older cottages along that stretch there. Thank you.
All right. Last call. Are there any other comments or questions from committee? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you. And thank you for coming and speaking to it today. All right.
Very much, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Oops, I've just signed the wrong one. Hold on, I've just signed the wrong one. Okay. With that, we are moving to the next application, and that is the report number development 2021-104, Z13 2021 HT Brunel Road Management 24 and 26 Veterans Way. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I'll just share my screen. So the subject lands are located at 24 and 26 Veterans Way, shown here on the screen. The lots are currently zoned residential 4 and are designated urban residential in the official plan. The applicant intends to construct a 2-story, 6-unit multiple dwelling building to the rear of the existing duplex on 24 Veterans Way. So this is the proposed. And they are also proposing a shared parking lot to service this new building, the existing duplex, and a 4-plex all on 26 Veterans Way. The applicant intends to work with the district to provide the new rental units as affordable or attainable housing units, and will seek funding under their Muskoka Affordable Housing Initiative program. To facilitate this development, the applicant requests a rezoning of the lot from a residential 4 zone to a residential 4 holding with exception zone to permit a maximum density of 12 units within a maximum of 3 multiple residential buildings, to require a minimum 2.1 meter high privacy fence and minimum 1 meter wide vegetative buffer for visual screening purposes along the rear of the properties, to reduce the required number of parking spaces from 18 to 11, to reduce the required landscape buffer width around the parking lot from 1.5 to 1.4. I believe it's to address this area there. To reduce the required lot area for each residential dwelling unit from 167 meters squared to 108 meters squared, and to reduce the easterly side yard setback from 6 meters to 2.1 meters for this area, to reduce the rear yard setback from 10 meters to 1.4 meters, given this setback, and to reduce the maximum building height from 11 meters to 8.3 meters, so to cap the height. The holding provision would be imposed to ensure that adequate provisions for attainable housing and pedestrian infrastructure are secured to the satisfaction of the town, and a site plan agreement has been entered into to address these matters. Also, the holding would be imposed to ensure that the lots are merged on title, and to require the proponent to provide cash in lieu of parking to address the reduction in parking standard, which would amount to 21,000 overall. The built-up area within Huntsville's urban settlement area, which includes the subject lands, is the main target for intensification in the town. Development within this area is to be compact in form, appropriately sized and sited in the context of its surroundings, located in areas where existing services are available or can be efficiently and cost-effectively provided, and achieve greater densities than the surrounding areas while maintaining the appropriate transition of built form to adjacent areas. Additionally, a range in housing options should be provided, subject to servicing constraints and considering smart value housing options. The urban residential designation permits higher density development along with various other housing options with the gross density for high density residential development being between 25 and 60 units per gross hectare. In this instance, the gross density is approximately 92 units per gross hectare. However, it is noted that the development is intended to provide smart value or attainable housing options, and this higher density may be appropriate in consideration of this community benefit. Additionally, the proponent has agreed to consider providing funds for establishing pedestrian infrastructure in the vicinity of the property. Section C3, the official plan states that density provisions may be exceeded for medium and high density residential development where community benefits are provided to the satisfaction of the town and legally secured by appropriate agreements from the town. In this particular instance, the requested density increase is to facilitate development that is consistent with the goals and objectives and policies of the official plan relating to provision of smart value or attainable housing, and is compatible with the surrounding area. Additionally, the development provides community benefits above and beyond those that would otherwise be provided, and these are appropriate and reasonably related to the increase in density. Holding clauses are recommended in this instance to address the implementation of the community benefits. To address the proposed reduction in parking, which is supported by the official plan, policies provide that an alternate standard that can be allowed if it's to support affordable housing. And the holding provision clause respecting the payment of cash in lieu of parking is also recommended in this instance. Just to note, the applicant is providing these units. They would be 1-bedroom units, and some of the tenants would not be using vehicles. We understand that the proponent has partnered with Community Living Huntsville to provide some of these units to the individuals they assist. So a reduction in parking is also appropriate in that regard. As well, the properties close to downtown and the stores and amenities that proximity provides. Some of the photos I've provided in the staff report, I'm also showing you here today. This is the property, this is the duplex and the fourplex. This is looking at the property from the Veterans Way. There's a laneway between the duplex and the fourplex, which you would use to access the parking area. This image shows the opposite side, from the opposite side. So the laneway coming in. Image here shows the approximate location of where this building would go and the parking in the background. Sorry. This is a good image showing the situation looking north. So this is, there's no privacy screening in this area right now, which is why it's been proposed in this instance. And those are the site photos. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act, and 2 letters of objection were received and were appended to the report. Concerns raised in these letters focused on the reduced parking standards, increased density, and a loss of vegetation. In one letter, objections related to the overall density of development proposed and the reduction of setbacks to help address impacts on surrounding areas. And not to help address impacts, but that could result in impacts to surrounding areas. This objector expressed their support for intensification and provision of affordable housing in the Huntsville urban settlement area, but identified concerns relating to the overall density proposed in light of the reduced setbacks, and suggested a smaller structure such as a fourplex building may be more appropriate. This objector requested that the committee consider deferring a decision in relation to this matter until such time that the applicant is able to consult further with themselves and other neighbors respecting various recommended changes outlined in their letter. To address these comments, staff recommended an additional provision in the bylaw requiring an appropriate, as we've discussed already, an appropriately high privacy fence and a vegetative buffer strip between the subject properties and their lands. The application appears to conform to the policies of the official plan and be consistent with the provincial policy statement. Therefore, staff is recommending that the application be approved, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for that, Richard. At this point, I will call upon the applicant or their representative to speak to this application.
The applicant or their representative are reminded to use the raised hand button or press *9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address the committee. And Chair Alcock, I can confirm we do have one hand raised, so I will bring them into the meeting now. A reminder, please have your microphone and video if possible turned on before you begin speaking, and please do confirm your name and mailing address.
Thanks for that, Sam. Welcome back, John.
Thank you. You've got my mailing address, I'm sure. Thank you, Planning Committee, for hearing us today on this application. This is another project for attainable housing from Burnell Road Management. Proposing here is to rezone a property that's currently zoned R4 to an R4 with an exception to permit a 6-unit building with 6 one-bedroom apartments. One-bedroom apartments are most needed throughout Huntsville and throughout most of Muskoka. Part of the benefit of that is it allows for a smaller building and a smaller footprint and a compact form of development. We provided a concept plan from Pinestone Engineering that shows how that would look on the site. And when you look at the existing area, the whole block there is predominantly zoned high and medium density in the zoning. There are a couple of R2 zones closer to Burnell Road. My client also owns the 2 apartments directly west of the subject lands. Along the street to the lots to the north, the homes are orientated quite close to the sidewalk. I think anyone that's driven down Princess can see that those homes are lacking in a front yard for the most part. So the orientation of those ones is closer to Princess Street. The building design is quite compact in footprint. It's only 150 meters square. That's about 1,600 square feet, about the size of a dwelling, and 2 stories in height. And the height's about 8 meters. And in the R4 zone, there is an 11-meter height allowable. So part of sort of addressing some of the concerns was to put a limitation on the height in the zoning bylaw so that we keep that profile low in the building. The area had been zoned by the town in that block when they did the comprehensive bylaw, and to encourage high density in this area due to the close proximity to the downtown core and all the services and businesses that are provided. It allows for walking distance to most of these businesses and services. The elementary and high school are within walking distance. The location right at the corner, there's a Huntsville transit stop. There's parks and recreational facilities, numerous within walking distance of the subject lands. The idea was to tuck the dwelling in behind so it wouldn't impact upon the facade on the street and sort of hide the building to the rear. It takes advantage of an existing lot that is currently zoned for that type of use. The district has stated that servicing won't be an issue. We're not looking at having to extend pipes on municipal roads, etc. The building will be designed under the current building code, which is high in energy efficiency and supports climate change. Most of the residents of the attainable housings aren't using the cars at the same standard that the zoning bylaw sort of suggests. And so we've asked for the exception to not have to provide the parking there. Again, banks don't like to fund soft services, and paying for fees for parking is one of those soft services that they won't cover. We're trying to create a truly attainable project and work with the district and the town to provide these units for the segment of our community that can't afford the going rates of today. Also, Richard had mentioned that Grinnell Road Management has a long-standing tradition of working with community living and providing opportunities for housing their clients as well. The height of the building will be similar to the other apartments in the area. It's about 8 meters, which is well below the requirement. It's also 2 meters lower than a typical dwelling. The property is located in the built-up area of the town. It's compact in size. The scale is appropriate, as the land had been zoned for high and medium density development. The location takes advantage of existing infrastructure. It is the owner's intent to work with the district and obtain funding for the attainable housing. And that I guess is one of the aspects that my clients have no objection to tying their zoning to that potential funding. The location supports transportation and active living. The existing grassed areas in front of the building will be maintained. There are significant parks nearby. There have been multiple dwellings and other attainable units scattered throughout this area as well. The scale of the building is low at 2 stories and lower, similar to the abutting lots, and the topography of this site is lower than on Princess Street, resulting in a lower profile. Staff requested some additional fencing along there. We think that that is a good idea to create some separation between the uses, even though those lands are zoned multiple or medium density residential to the north. I think some of them are still being used as single family dwellings. So a fence during times of transition is a good idea, as well as additional planting. The height of the building is significantly lower than the R4 standard. Now, the clause that we're relying on with respect to, and I just want to take a few minutes on this topic because it hasn't come up before in Huntsville, and it's section 3.312 of the Huntsville official plan. And the policy states that the residential density provisions may be exceeded for medium and high density residential development where community benefits are provided by the developer to the satisfaction of the town and are legally secured by appropriate agreements with the town. Such community benefits may include, amongst other matters, underground parking, provision of attainable housing, increased specialized activity areas, recreational facilities, community facilities, cultural heritage preservation, public easements or conveyance of shoreline areas or other public benefits. And it's intended to use this provision to exceed the density envisioned in the OP. The owners have provided several attainable housing projects throughout Huntsville with great success. They also partner with Community Living, and we have provided a letter from Community Living to attach to the file as well. And it's our feeling that the public benefit for approving this is having the attainable housing units built on this site in this location, close proximity to the downtown. A lot of the residents in this group can't afford vehicles. A lot of them do have electric bikes and scooters, and utilize those, which take up far less site for parking. And I think my client will speak to some of their other projects with respect to the amount of uptake on parking spaces versus the units that are on the site. Given the current rental rates in Huntsville, it's admirable that someone would build these units. They're significantly, substantially lower than the market rents. And I'm not speaking about the market rents established by Canada Mortgage and Housing, the going market rents today in this area, including all of Muskoka for that matter. So the question, and again, Richard and we had discussions on this, and it will be a committee decision to make. And we're asking you is to allow the community benefit to be the fact that we're doing attainable housing. Once we start piling additional fees on top of our benefit, then it takes away from moving ahead and trying to build these in an appropriate way. Again, with the attainable housing, we are part of that agreement with the district is that they have to maintain their rents at a certain area, and that's done through a legal agreement that's registered on title to the lands. And we had no objection to, again, tying that conditionally through the zoning and or through the site plan process. The application, in our opinion, meets the official plan. We would hope that committee would support just the attainable to justify the additional density. We have tried to mitigate the concerns of the neighbors. Really, the location of the dwelling, it abuts my client's property to the west where they have additional multiple dwellings. Then there's the break of the fourplex before we get over to, I believe, 2 double duplexes east of the site there. The application meets the intent of the district official plan. In my opinion, it meets the Huntsville official plan. It's definitely in keeping with the provincial policy statements, and in my professional opinion, this application represents good planning on the subject lands. And I'd be glad to answer any questions. I think Ken Oben from Bernal Road Management would like to give a little bit of background and speak as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I will ask if Ken Oben would like, if he's there. Sam, maybe you can check.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I do see that hand's been raised. So with your permission, I'll move them into the meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. It's been a long time since I've been involved in a meeting like this.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate everyone taking time to listen today. The application, I don't think, could have been better represented by, I think the town planner and our planner.
Ken, I hate to do this, but you're supposed to state your name and address. It's been a long time, so I'll just remind you.
Fair enough. It's Ken Oben, and I proudly live in at 918 Jones Lane in Huntsville. P1H 1B2. Really happy to be back. I'll try to be brief because I know this is going to be a long meeting, but I do want to just give a bit of background on Brunel Road. We were one of the first private organizations that became involved in this type of program about 11 years ago. And why that's a bit important is that we've maintained the original project and several others. And part of this project is really, it stems from the relationship that we have in the partnership with both local levels of government, actually, in provision of affordable or attainable housing. And oddly enough, there's a whole host of things, and I think the planners have really described it well, but these are very complicated projects to put together based on a whole host of things. And we sort of looked at this, the one-bedroom unit notion comes from the need. That's identified to us. Steve and I, or Brunel Road Management and I, or Brunel Road Management is always focused on larger units. That fits really well, as been described, but it also helps drive to the very specific needs that people have. Our clients are seniors in community living, the long-standing relationship with local seniors and the organization, community living. And one of the realities is that that group, generally speaking, they don't own cars, they don't need the parking. At the end of the day, our numbers are very simple. We have many units in town. We actually have about 45 parking spots with 16 cars in that's our entire organization. So that does include all the market rents. You did see a very telling picture when we were looking through the staff, and there was a parking lot there. And if you'll indulge me, it was last Christmas when we started walking this lot, and there was a solitary car in a parking lot for 6 vehicles. And that became the theme at many of our buildings, particularly our affordable housing buildings. And so John put it really well at the end. We're happy to engage. This is the business we're in. We intend to stay in this business, and we've been successful, and I think we've provided a very strong service. The challenge is viability. And so whilst we both ask that and appreciate the efforts, in recommending this, we do ask to reconsider the additional costs. At the end of the day, costs for, say, sidewalks at the front, cash in lieu, they simply get tacked on to the cost of this. And again, the viability of this project is very, very complex. Our construction costs, as everyone knows, no one needs a lecture in this at all. We know that they're very, very high. We want to provide and have provided traditionally very sustainable buildings. Whilst we're seeing a lot of these with the ICF, it's a very solid, it's a very highly efficient building, and that leads to both sustainability, but also, frankly, operational costs and longevity of the businesses or the buildings. Appreciate and we'll try to answer any questions, and I appreciate your consideration on this today, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for coming today and your presentation. If you turn your mute on, that'd be great. And we'll hang around because I will be turning to committee for comments and questions. Okay, thank you. So at this point, I forgot one stage, which is, are there members of the public who would like to speak to this application?
Members of the public are reminded to use the raise hand button or press star 9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address the committee. And Chair Alcock, I can confirm we do have 2 hands raised.
Okay.
So I can move them in one at a time.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
So as a reminder, please ensure you have your microphone and video if possible turned on, and please confirm your name and mailing address. So I'll move the first person in.
Hello.
Hey, Salim Hall, 5 Princess Street, Huntsville, Ontario, P1H 1P2. And the other person that's raised their hand, they're my wife. She's my wife, and she's just on another computer. So I have no objections for her coming in, and she's going to kill me for even saying that. But Tracy Mellish is the one that has her hand up. So if there's no objections for her joining us.
Nope, no objections. So you're suggesting she come in at the same time that you're here?
If that's okay, yeah.
Yes, that's fine. Absolutely.
Thank you, Chair. I've moved her in.
Perfect. Thank you. There we go.
Yay.
Tracy, are you, your mute is on and now your video's on. Okay, perfect.
My apologies for that. He took me by surprise there. I'm at a different location, so that took me a second to get going and my internet kind of went slow. So Tracy Mellish, same address, 5 Princess Street, Huntsville, P1H, P13 or P12. I can't remember what the postal code is. My apologies.
Okay, so who's going first? Or
I'm going to speak on behalf, and she'll just yell at me if I get something wrong. I think what we'd like to do, and Ken and John, thanks so much for the presentation, and Richard for giving the overview. I'd like to reframe our letter as less than of an objection and more of an opportunity to have a conversation, because I don't think anyone around the room here, especially me and Tracy, are not objecting to the development of sustainable, affordable, attainable housing. I work for the YMCA here. Tracy is a member of the hospice board. We're active members of the community. We believe strongly in this development, and we'll just say off the top, we appreciate the staff's work in actually looking at incorporating fences and vegetation. And we would also support removing some of those costs to Ken in the development to get this off the ground. We think affordable and attainable housing is important to the infrastructure in our community. I think the reason why we wanted to present and be here is just to have an opportunity to how do we create housing, sustainable housing, accessible housing in the Huntsville core that meets everybody's needs. And we were proposing and we were suggesting, and I don't want to rehash what we put on our letters, that we thought the idea of doubling the residents from 6 to 12 was a little bit excessive. We thought a 4-unit complex would be more in line with what the area is able to manage. But more so, we also wanted to provide some input on, the relationship to the building to the back lot. What can we do about light pollution? Is there any opportunity to reframe the way the housing is or the building situated so that, mostly there are, the windows for bathrooms are usually the smallest windows that give less noise. Could we maybe situate the building so, some of the smaller windows are facing our back lot? John did bring up a good point that we don't have a lot of front yardage in our area. So our back lot, our backyard is a really important place for us to enjoy. And again, it's not about saying no to housing. We're big supporters of community living. We're big supporters of the work that Ken has done in our community, and we'll continue to support that. I think we just wanted an opportunity to pause this, to request a deferral of a decision so we can engage in a more fruitful conversation. I think doing this will kind of set the tone and even create a template of how more development can be integrated within our community, because for sure this is not going to be the last proposal that comes our way that's going to be integrated into current housing. And so that's what we wanted to present, is that we're not saying no, we're definitely welcoming this. I think what we want to do is look at the size and scope of it. Definitely the setback from 10 meters to 1.3 or 1.5 is a concern, both from a noise pollution and light pollution piece. But we did want to just kind of present our concern, less of an objection and more of a concern, and engage in a dialogue. Again, we appreciate the work that the town planning committee has done in terms of addressing our concerns beforehand. And we would be an advocate for reducing some of those costs to Ken and the team to get this housing underway. And that's,
And I think if I could just add to what Celine said, I know that in the other objection, there was some concerns raised around parking. I guess we didn't even consider that in our letter. From our perspective, we have no concerns about the number of parking spots being reduced. So from sort of one of the people that's also close to the area, from our perspective, we support that. We understand, based on everything that was said here today and our own knowledge of the community living, those who are involved in the organization, that there is not the same need for parking that there would be for targeting a different demographic. So we fully support the reduction of the parking spots, not an issue at all for us. And as Lynn said, if it helps support affordable housing, we definitely would want to go on record and say that, any reduced cost that could be, any additional cost that could be removed for them, I think that would be well worth consideration. But as Lynn said, for us, when we consider, especially during the time of COVID, when we consider how big 1 meter is, that's kind of a short distance when we're trying to keep 2 meters apart from each other. And that's a very small distance from the back lot. So that was really our concern, and hoping to maybe have it, engage directly perhaps with the applicant in how we might come up with a solution that works for everybody. And as Celine said, officially, we certainly have no objection to this. We're not trying to stop it. We're just trying to maybe work together to find a little bit of a different way that works for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you both for your Oh, sorry, Celine.
No. So I think in with that, and I dared not cut my wife off, but I will say that we are just asking for a deferral for some more time to engage in a more fulsome conversation, if that's an opportunity. Again, it's not to stop the project by any means. It's to engage in a conversation. And we applaud Ken and the work him and the team are doing. I can't speak enough about it. I think it's amazing. And so.
Okay, I just want to thank you both for your comments. Very reasonable. And just a quick question: have you had a chance to speak to the applicant about the project before this meeting? No.
No, we have not.
No. Okay, all right, that's helpful. Okay, at this point, I would like to ask you both to stay in the picture because we haven't gone to committee questions yet. But you've got your mute on, and that's great. I should find out, though, if there are any other members of the public who would like to speak to this application.
Members of the public are reminded to use the raise hand button or press *9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address the committee. Chair Alcock, I can confirm there are no additional hands raised.
Okay, thanks very much, Sam. So at this point, if I may ask Julie to put the motion on the screen, I will read it as it stands, and then we'll turn it over to questions and comments from committee. All right. So we have a motion moved by Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Councillor Stone. It is recommended that Planning Committee approve zoning bylaw amendment Z13-2021 HT, changing the zoning from a residential 4 zone to a residential 4 holding zone with an exception to permit a maximum density of 12 units within a maximum of 3 multiple residential buildings, require a minimum of 2.1 meter high privacy fence and a minimum 1 meter wide vegetative buffer for visual screening along the rear lot line. Reduce the required number of parking spaces from 18 to 11. Reduce the required landscape buffer width around a parking lot from 1.5 meters to 1.4 meters. Reduce the required lot area for each residential dwelling unit from 167 meters squared to 108 meters squared. Reduce the easterly side yard setback from 6 meters to 2.1 meters. Reduce the rear yard setback of 10 meters to 1.4 meters, and reduce the maximum building height from 11 meters to 8.3 meters, and that the holding provision may be removed and development may proceed upon the Director of Development Services being satisfied that the following has been completed. Adequate provisions for attainable housing and pedestrian infrastructure are secured to satisfaction of the Town of Huntsville, and a site plan agreement has been entered into to address these matters. The subject lots being merged on title and cash in lieu of parking being provided in accordance with Bylaw 89-200 in the amount of $21,000, which is $3,000 per parking space. So with that, I will turn it over to committee for questions or comments with respect to the motion before us, or any of the comments that you've heard. Mayor Terziano.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Probably question to, I don't know, John or Ken. And hi, Ken, welcome. I bet you never did Zoom in your day. Sorry, I lost track there. Oh, okay. So affordable housing, it's all great. Everything you're proposing is all great. But what I see right now is 6 units there with 1 backyard, green space, activity space for the units that are there, and we're about to put a building in it. I don't know who currently lives in those existing 6 units, but has there been any consultation about taking away that area?
Okay, thank you for that question. And I see that we have a hand up from Mr. Oben. Your mute is still on. And you're.
Sorry about that.
There we go. Got it.
Oddly enough, Karen, if you look at so the answer to the direct question is no, there really hasn't been. And there is a bit of a reason for that. If you look at the lay of the land, as was described, there's 2 parcels of land. One is a 4-plex, which currently the entire backyard is filled with parking. And that's actually where the parking is proposed. The other building on the separate lot is a duplex. And again, there's really, as far as the use with that specific group, it's not significant. So we have not had that discussion.
Yeah.
So I guess just further to that, so there really won't be any green area or play area or activity area for what becomes 12 units now.
So I think if I may just continue the discussion, one of the points that John made is that in this particular instance, there actually is front yard, and that we are attempting to maintain that, or we'll be maintaining that. There's no reason not to, because there's nothing changing out on the front side of these 2 buildings.
Your worship.
If I can, a second question I had was about the existing parking. I think, Ken, you said that when you go down there, there's 1 car in 6 spots or for 6 units. I'm not sure which. So I'm not sure if there's enough area for 6 spots or that you were referring to 6 units. Sorry.
So again, if you look at the picture, it was just to make the point, there was a picture of the existing parking for the 4-unit building. And it has a single car for so right now that I believe and I'll look to John, I believe it's 1.5 spots per unit. And so that actually is a 6-unit spot right now. And again, we're certainly not saying please take anecdotal evidence of numbers, but it really is quite uncanny that the parking is across our affordable units is really quite empty for the most part. And that's just to drive home that fact. But that was the 6 spots that are associated with the current 4-unit building.
Okay, thank you. And I noticed Mr. Gallagher has his hand up. John.
Just to add on to what Ken's saying, there's a significant amount of parking lots in the area. The Legion lot sits empty all the time. The town's looking at upgrading Veterans Way. There'll likely be road parking there. My clients have additional parking over on 28 West Street that's available for overflow. And one of the items that, there are a couple of the points that the neighbors had raised. In this instance, we are providing an accessible parking spot near the new building there. Any lighting that would be proposed for the site would definitely have to be dark sky friendly lighting. And the idea of the fencing, that it be a solid board fence so that if there are vehicles coming in through the back, that you're not being hit with lights all the time as people come and go. We tried different locations on the site to place the building, but it was ineffective. So what we tried to do was to, because my clients own the land to the west, we tried to keep it tucked in that corner over there, because we've kept the width of the building, which is 32 feet wide, sort of abutting those areas as opposed to the flankage of 50 feet wide. When I first started out on the design, we looked at running a building along the back lot line, and it just didn't look right. So my clients asked me to, push it over to the west side of the property. And so that's what we've done there. Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate that comment. If I may quickly follow up on the question around the existing green space where the building is going. I think in one of the pictures, it looked like it actually was being used by somebody. I forget what was there, but it did look like there was some activity. So I in response to, I think it was you, John, who raised the idea that the area is surrounded with other parks. And I just was thinking, which ones in particular did you think the new residents might be close to, that you could see them walking to?
I definitely could see them walking probably the same distance to River Mill Park, which has the kids' playground there, and active along the waterfront. You've got the recreational trail running along River Road. You've got Lions Lookout. Conroy Park is a little further down the field. To some degree, if seniors are into curling, that's walking distance up the street. That's another facility. The school at Huntsville Public is probably 5-6 minute walk from this site. So there's ample opportunities. Even using, across the street, there's lots of green space on the Legion if someone wants to sit out there. When I did post the sign for the meeting, I did notice one of the residents was out there utilizing the front yard,
right?
Basically sitting outside, watching the cars go by and catching some sun while they were there. So,
okay, thank you for that. I notice Mayor Terziano.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that comment. The picture, I believe, showed a fire pit and a chair. I don't think anybody's going to walk anywhere to have a fire in a chair. So I really do want to know if there's any answer to whether there'll be any space whatsoever for a small fire pit and 2 chairs, even for 12 units. Now, I assume 26 and 24 are being merged all together. So we're talking about one big complex, and I'm wondering what amenity space will be available other than the postage stamp sized front yards.
Okay, who would like to, Mr. Gallagher?
thank you. If you see the site plan that was proposed there, we do have some areas up west of the accessible parking spot. We will have to access the parking. And this is, sometimes when we have rules in the zoning bylaw, they're a tad excessive. And, so we're providing the access to these parking spots to meet the requirements. But again, there is room in between the duplex and the 6 unit. There's room to the rear. A lot of people, and you can see it on the, a good example might be is the 6 units that are on the old Hammond well drilling site at the northwest corner of West Street South and Veterans Way. There's 0 backyard on that building, and what you have is you have people sitting up on lawn chairs. I think a couple of them have put up some little temporary structures as well. So I guess, is there room for a fire? You could probably get a fire pit in beside the accessible parking spot, but again, you want to, I guess if that's the intent, this, and maybe it's more of a question or can, but again, having to provide all this parking pulls back on other uses on the site specifically.
Okay, thank you for that, John. But actually, I would like to follow up on that and ask our manager of planning, Richard, if you could just give us a sense of what your take was on, we normally would have amenity space, regardless of what kind of development. That seems like a critical part of our planning. And so I was trying to get your sense, looking through the planning lens, as to how we justify not really having a lot of amenity space, because frankly, we are removing the amenity space.
Yeah, so through you, Madam Chair, that is one of the things that we looked at also when we were looking at this application. And basically, the removal of the rear yard and replacing it with this 6-unit dwelling, we saw it the exact same way. It's eliminating the green space for the tenants. We did acknowledge, similar to what Mr. Gallagher is pointing out, that there are many community amenities in the area. So it's not uncommon in a more urban setting like this for to expect tenants to have to travel to those community amenities. So that is the reason why we thought, if you're increasing the density as much as you are on this property, then a community benefit to consider is pedestrian movement, to allow these tenants and other tenants to move more freely between the site and these community amenities. So that's the reason we were suggesting it would be appropriate in this instance.
I appreciate that. And you're specifically referencing the pedestrian infrastructure, which is a sidewalk. Is that the sidewalk?
Yeah, it might not be a sidewalk necessarily. It could be crossings, but pedestrian-oriented infrastructure, it could very well be a sidewalk. One of the things we have had is we've had discussions already with Mr. Gallagher about this issue, including our operations staff. And Mr. Gallagher's right, Veterans Way is scheduled for improvement. So what we would do with this proponent moving forward is work with them to come up with an appropriate, reasonable cost for contributing to that pedestrian infrastructure.
Okay, appreciated. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Armour.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not so much a question, but maybe this is a good opportunity for Mr. Gallagher and Mr. Oben to maybe go back, have the conversation with the local residents and talk about the building itself and how it can fit within their community, and also maybe speak to the residents who are currently living there and find out what the usage is of the green space. Because I think that's really the question we're trying to answer, but we don't all live there. So I think maybe deferral would be the best thing right now, and come back here in a month and we can sit down, discuss it, and have all the answers that we're trying to get today.
Okay, so are you proposing to put a motion on the floor for deferral?
Absolutely.
Okay, so Julie, are you? Okay, so you know what? This is perfect. It's 3:23. I'm going to call for a 5-minute break? A 10-minute break. Sorry guys, but we don't need 10. Somewhere between 5 and 10. How about 7-minute break? And then we can all, we'll get back. 7 minutes, everybody.
Hey, Ken, can you hear me at all? It's Celine.
Salim, were you asking if I was here?
Yeah, I was wondering, listen, I wanted to be respectful. You know,
Hey, thank you. Good. I'm assuming we're live again. Thanks, Sam. Are we live? Yeah.
We are, yes.
All right. Okay. All right. Julie's about to share the motion to defer. I have a motion moved by Councillor Armour, right? And seconded by, I can't see, but I will say Councillor Stone. If I can see, actually I can't see Councillor Stone. Councillor Stone, are you ready to second this motion? Yes. Okay. All right. I can ask somebody else. Councillor Fitzgerald, is he back? I think Stone, and you need to put it back up on the screen, please, Julie. Okay. It is recommended that the matter of application Z13 2021, and I can't, wait a sec, I've got something in the way here. Burnell Road Management be postponed for 1 month to allow for further discussion with surrounding neighbors. Any comments or questions with respect to this revised? Yes, Councillor Stone.
Just a question to the applicants. I'm just wondering, is this a great hardship, or are we okay to just let it go for a month and come back?
Okay, I will ask. I am, okay, sorry, who would like to speak to that? Mr. Oben or Mr. Oben?
We really would like to move. There's no question. Nonetheless, when you get support from your objectors like we did, and I really appreciate the comments of our neighbors, it really does compel you to say, let's at least go and stand over the fence and talk about what we can do. And that said, there are also two other elements around the deferral. And one of the things is, with all respect, we are actually asking to change it slightly as well with respect to some of the fees. And perhaps that could be part of the consideration. And clearly there's another discussion. And I think when you look at the drawing, there's a balance between setbacks and amenities. So it's really quite fair to say that there is a round of discussion to be held. So I appreciate this. And one of the things I do want to point out, though, and I just in our defense or from our side, is one of the challenges is we will do this. I would support it, and I would encourage everyone to agree and put it to bed. It is important. We see this as shovel ready. We've got a lot of work to do. We come and ask for approval, and we go in and we build, and we want to see these finished within the year. So we probably won't be in the ground this fall, but we sure want to hit the ground running really, really aggressively in the spring. So we look forward to good, solid discussions, and appreciate the listening. I know we probably definitely went over our 10 minutes. I apologize for that.
I just want to say thank you for your comments, and most definitely the committee recognizes all of the work that your company has done, and that is very much appreciated and on such an important issue. And also appreciated that you're willing to take another month and talk about all of the issues that we talked about today. So I think that makes sense and appreciated. All right, any other comments from committee? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion before us? Okay, and that carries. Thank you, everybody, for your participation on this. It's great.
Thank you.
All right, so you got the movers and seconders, right? Okay, perfect. All right, with that, we're moving right along with.
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt. Is it possible for us just to, as for Salim and I, just to understand how best to connect then with
Tracy,
Ken and his
Tracy,
team?
you know what? You're in committee. We've closed this particular
I'm sorry.
file. If you wouldn't mind, can you follow up with our staff on that? That would be great. Thank you. Okay. No worries. Okay. All right. With that, we're moving on to the next item, and we're back to you, Richard. It is report number Development 2021-105, said 19-2021. Sutton, 2189 Lone Pine Drive.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I'll just share my screen. So the subject lands are located at 2189 Lone Pine Drive. The lot is currently zoned Rural 1 and Natural Resources and is designated rural in the official plan. The applicant is seeking a rezoning to recognize a motor vehicle repair shop as a permitted home industry in an existing garage/shop on the property. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment would rezone a portion of the lot from Rural 1 to Rural 1 with exception to permit this use subject to certain restrictions. The shop is located in this general area, and the draft bylaw applies just to that area of the property. So the actual exception is to recognize, as I say, the motor vehicle repair shop in the garage, It's to require a minimum 10-meter wide vegetative screening buffer along the front yard between the road and the shop, and associated outdoor storage areas. So in this area, it's to restrict the number of vehicles associated with the use to be stored on site at any one time to no more than 3 vehicles. And it's to prohibit derelict vehicles or unplanted vehicles to be stored outdoors. So these are just some photos of the property so you can get your bearings. This is the existing shop that the applicants want to use as a motor vehicle repair shop, just from various angles walking around to get an idea. This is a typical outdoor storage area, and as part of the use that's being proposed, outdoor storage is allowed in the rural area, but what we're asking for is this 10-meter wide vegetative screening. That's the existing house, which is just east of the shop. So the application, I should say that a site evaluation report was submitted in support of this application, and this site evaluation report was prepared by Hutchison Environmental Services, and it looked at some of the natural constraints in the vicinity of the shop. So these included a wildland fire hazard area and a nearby watercourse with surrounding wetlands and flood-prone lands. And it determined that with recommendations to control risk of wildland fire hazards, that the development could proceed, and the use would be, any risk to the use could be appropriately mitigated. And it also said that the use was set back appropriately from those constraints. The planning application, this planning application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act, and no comments were received. District comments were included in the report, and they had no concerns. Building commented on this application, indicating that the applicant must apply for a change in use permit for the garage through their department. So that would be handled separately. And in conclusion, the application appears to conform to the policies of the official plan and be consistent with the provincial policy statement. Therefore, staff is recommending that the application be approved.
Okay. Thank you very much, Richard. At this point, I will ask if the applicant is here or their representative and would like to speak to the application.
The applicant or their representative are reminded to use the raise hand button or press *9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address the committee. Chair Alcock, we can confirm there are no hands raised.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak to this application?
Members of the public are reminded to use the raise hand button or press *9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address the committee. Chair Alcott, I can confirm there are no hands raised.
Okay, that was quick, thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Oh, actually at this point, I will read the motion that we have before us. It has been moved by Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Councillor Armour. It is recommended the Planning Committee approve zoning bylaw amendment Z19-2021 HT, changing the zoning on a portion of the property from a rural 1 zone to a rural 1 zone with an exception, to recognize a motor vehicle repair shop as a permitted home industry in an existing 185 meter squared garage shop, require a minimum 10 meters wide vegetated screening buffer along the front yard between the road and both the shop and associated outdoor storage areas, restrict the number of vehicles associated with the use to be stored on site at any one time to no more than 3 vehicles, and prohibit derelict or unplated vehicles to be stored outdoors. Okay, with that, are there any questions or comments from committee? Councillor Stone.
Maybe I missed it, but did Richard speak about comments from neighbors? Is this the property that there were comments on?
No, you didn't miss it. There were no comments received on this particular application.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Mayor Terziano.
Thanks, Chair. Just Richard, how you describe the buffering or whatever between the road and any stored vehicles, just from the pictures you showed us, will the buffering you've described in there make it so that we can't actually see that? Because those weren't very attractive pictures.
Yeah, these the outdoor storage areas, they are permitted on a rural lot, but what you try to do is to screen anything that's not attractive using vegetative buffers. The 10-meter wide buffer would be an increase to the buffer that's there in certain locations, so it would enhance the screening that's already there. So I think it would achieve the goal of screening those less attractive areas when viewed from the road.
Okay, I just think that I understand that they're allowed to store in the rural area, but if we're giving a permission for a shop and we can enforce additional screening, I think we should.
Yeah, and this is a provision that doesn't exist currently on the rural lots, so it would be something added to help mitigate the visual impacts.
It's also noted that in the recommendation, we're prohibiting derelict or unplated vehicles to be stored outdoors as well. So it's another feature.
And I should also note that the home industry provisions in the zoning bylaw would apply to this area, and there are several provisions within that those provisions that restrict visual impact. So things like signage. It also makes sure that any home industry proposed has to go through the site plan process. So there are other tools that we'll be able to use by making this part of a home industry on the property.
Okay. All right, are there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. And thank you, Richard, for that. We're on to Adam with report 7.4, report development 2021-92, and with respect to 270 Chub Lake Road.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Is everyone able to see my screen all right?
Yes.
Excellent. As mentioned, the subject property is located at 270 Chub Lake Road. The current zoning on the subject land is Rural 1, and it's designated rural in the official plan. The applicant is proposing to rezone a portion of the subject property to a rural residential zone, as well as an amended Rural 1 zone with an exception for frontage. This application was in conjunction with a consent application. The applicant is proposing to create a new rural residential lot as seen here on the sketch, approximately 2 hectares in size with 134 meters in frontage. In support of the application, a wildland fire risk assessment was completed, and to implement those recommendations, staff are recommending an exception be placed on the rural residential zoning. The resulting lot to be retained would have a frontage of 114 meters and would also require an exception to permit that. Given the existing situation on the site, the retained lot is currently serviced over an existing driveway and no new entrances would be proposed. As a result, staff are of the opinion that the reduced frontages is appropriate in this instance. Here are some site photos. This is the existing entrance into the subject property, the lot to be retained, and these are photos of the approximate location of the newly created lot. The application was circulated in accordance with the Planning Act. No comments or objections were received, and staff are satisfied that given the exceptions, the proposal is consistent with both the provincial policy statement and the official plan and are recommending approval. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that, Adam, for that concise presentation. At this point, I would ask if the applicant or the applicant's representative is here to speak to this application?
The applicant or their representative are reminded to use the raised hand button or press *9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address the committee. Chair Alcock, I can see that one hand's been raised, so I will bring them into the meeting now. As a reminder, please have your microphone and video if possible turned on before you begin speaking, and please confirm your name and mailing address.
Good afternoon, Savitz Fratis, Plan Muskoka, PO Box 5384, Huntsville, Ontario, P1H 2K7. I'm here this afternoon representing the applicants as their agent and as a professional planner. To say that I've read the staff report and I agree with the recommendation made by staff. It was a pretty concise presentation, and it's because it's a fairly simple application. So it's simply looking to create a new lot on a piece of property that's very underutilized. New lot meets the requirements in the official plan for a new rural residential lot. The retained lot falls just a little short on frontage, but given just the sheer size of it, the fact that there's no new entrances proposed, and also the character of the neighborhood is such as that the majority of the lots in the area are actually significantly smaller than what's being proposed with the separate and retained lots. We feel that the character is maintained and there wouldn't be any issue with the minor deficiency in frontage on the retained lot. So for those reasons, I was able to conclude that I thought there was good planning and in conformity with the official plan and consistent with the PPS. I think I agree with the staff's recommendation for the approval of it, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your concise presentation as well, Mr. Veratis. Thank you. At this point, I would ask if there are any members of the public who would like to speak to this application.
Members of the public are reminded to use the raised hand button or press *9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address the committee. Chair Alcock, I can confirm there are no hands raised.
Okay, thank you very much, Sam. So at this point, I will read the motion before us, and that has been moved by Councillor Armour, seconded by Councillor Stone. It is recommended that Planning Committee approve zoning bylaw amendment Z14/2021 HT, the purpose and effect of which is to change the zoning from a rural 1 zone to a rural residential zone, with an exception requiring the recommendations and conclusions of the wildland fire risk assessment prepared by FRI Ecological Services to be implemented through site plan control in a rural 1 zone, with an exception to permit a reduction in required lot frontage from 120 meters to 114 meters. I had the right one. All right, are there any questions or comments from committee with respect to this motion? Okay, I don't see any. I am going to call the question. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you both for that.
Thank you.
All right, and back to you, Adam, with report development 2021-106 with respect to 67 Maws Hill Road and 672 Fish Lake Road.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is another concurrent zone change and consent application. As you mentioned, it's located at 67 Maws Hill Road and 672 Fish Lake Road. The subject lands currently zoned rural 1 and are designated rural in the official plan. The applicant is proposing to create 1 new lot and retain a lot. So given the area, this is actually taking place on the north side of Fish Lake Road. The balance of both properties are to the south, but given the existing roadway, this is already a legally conveyable lot here. So that is why this is a lot creation. Both the severed and retained lot are approximately 2.5 hectares in size, and both have over 250 meters of frontage on Fish Lake Road. For a environmental impact assessment was also conducted on the subject lands, as a small portion in approximately this area contains a wetland. The outcome of that was a 15-meter buffer, which staff are recommending be placed in a conservation zone, and are also recommending that the rural residential zone being sought have an exception on it to incorporate site plan control to include those recommendations. The application was circulated in accordance with the Planning Act. 3 letters of support were received and appended to the report for committee's information. As a result of the proposal, staff are confident that the proposal is consistent with both the provincial policy statement and our official plan, and are recommending that it be approved. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Adam. At this point, I will ask if the applicant or their representative is here to speak to this application.
The applicant or their representative are reminded to use the raise hand button or press *9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address the committee. And Chair Alcock, I can confirm we do have one hand raised. So I'll bring them into the meeting now. As a reminder, please have your microphone and video if possible turned on before you begin speaking, and please confirm your name and mailing address.
Good afternoon. It's Ted Williams here with Williams Surveying. I'm agent for the applicant. The address is 387 District Road number 3 North in Huntsville. And lucky you folk, I don't have a camera, so you don't have to look at my ugly mug.
I wasn't sure if I had to mention that or not, but there you go. No worries at all. We can hear you.
Okay, very good. So I am going to be briefer than Savas, and just say that my clients are in agreement with everything that's proposed, and I'm happy to answer any questions on their behalf.
Okay, much appreciated for that, and thank you. So with that, I will ask if there are any members of the public who would like to speak to this application.
Members of the public are reminded to use the raise hand button or press *9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address the committee. Chair Alcock, I can confirm there are no hands raised.
Thank you very much, Sam. I will read the motion that is before us. It has been moved by Councillor Armour, seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. It is recommended that Planning Committee approve zoning bylaw amendment Z16/2021 HT, the purpose and effect of which is to change the zoning from a rural 1 zone to a rural residential zone with an exception and a conservation zone as outlined in attachment 5 to this report to permit the creation of 1 new rural residential lot. With that, I would ask if there are any comments or questions from committee. Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you all for that. Look at us. Now speeding up. Okay, back to you, Adam, with report 7.6. Development 2021-107 Z17 2021 HT DeCourcy 435 Bylaw Acres Road.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, the subject property is located at 435 Bylaw Acres Road. It's currently zoned Shoreline Residential 1 and designated waterfront in our official plan. The applicant is proposing an amended Shoreline Residential 1 with a number of exceptions. I'll highlight a few of them here. In support of the application, an environmental impact study was done to assess fish habitat. As a result of that, the applicant is proposing to amend the type 1 to a type 2 classification, as that is more appropriate based on what was observed. It is also proposing to permit a maximum primary lot coverage of 15%, a maximum accessory lot coverage of 7%, permit a flat roof boathouse with a sitting area that extends 0.5 meters beyond the perimeter of the boathouse walls, recognize an existing 16.73 meter squared shed located between the dwelling and the shoreline, and reduce both the northerly side yard setback from 6 meters to 2.25 meters for an attached deck, reduce the front yard setback from 20 meters to 17.8 meters for an attached deck, and reduce the front yard setback from 20 meters to 18.7 meters for an attached 4-season sunroom. I know that was a lot of exceptions to digest. The applicant is proposing a new boathouse, as mentioned, located here. There's a number of one non-complying shed that is proposed to be removed as a result of this proposal, as well as an existing deck and stairs. And currently on the property, there's a dock that is also to be removed. The proposal would result in the boathouse occupying the maximum permitted area for the shoreline amenity area, and also based on the recommendations of the environmental impact study, all of the shoreline buffer will be brought back to a revegetated state per their recommendations, which would overall result in a net improvement to the existing situation. So we can see here the site photos. This beached area is proposed to be removed, and that's going to be the location of the proposed boathouse. You can see here, this dock is proposed to be removed, and up there, the shed that I had mentioned previously is also proposed to be removed, and the entire area, with the exception of the boathouse, will be revegetated to a natural state. This is in keeping with our policies regarding shoreline vegetation and net improvement to the situation. This is also the stairs and also an access path that the applicant currently uses for a family member to get down to the waterfront area. The application was circulated in accordance with the Planning Act and as well to the Ferry Lake Association. No objections or concerns were received at the time of writing this report. Staff are of the opinion that the proposed relief is appropriate and that the revegetation and the removal of non-complying accessory structures is a net improvement to the existing situation. As such, staff are recommending approval of this application, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you again, Adam. At this point, I will ask if the applicant or their representative is here.
The applicant or the representative are reminded to use the raise hand button or press *9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address the committee. Chair Alcock, I can confirm we do have one hand raised, so I'll bring them into the meeting. As a reminder, please have your microphone and video, if possible, turned on, and please confirm your name and mailing address.
Good afternoon, John P. Gallagher, 24 Hibberd Road, Huntsville, P1H 1C9. And I will be hanging around for that Elliott Street apartment in case anyone has any questions, if they want to bring me into it.
And John, just because this has been a really and continues to be a long meeting, this is no reflection of your presentations so far, but you will note that the previous two presentations were unbelievably short. So I just want to remind you that if you're adding new information, fantastic, but probably just that's.
Yep. No, I hear you, and yeah, my stomach's telling me it's close to dinner too. So I think Adam has explained the application quite well. Basically, it comes down to this: we're looking at two items. One is the boathouse, and because the water was defined as type 1, we had to do the fisheries assessment to allow it to occur. So we've created a boathouse that is more in keeping with the shoreline activity area frontage. The Riverstone report makes recommendations for additional plantings in areas adjacent the north property boundary. Where the proposed Muskoka room is going is over an existing deck. And so we are putting that one structure in that location over the existing deck and tying it into the shed, which is on the north boundary. The proposed asphalt path down to the water, the owners, or one of the owner, the wife, looks after a child in a wheelchair. And so that was the reason for getting that asphalt path down there. Again, Riverstone has made recommendations for planting on either side of it to stabilize it, ensure that the bank isn't impacted. These lots along Bylaw acres are small, and there have been other similar zonings recently, including the Hill property, which is very similar, that Peter Smith built as an example for scale. I'd be glad to answer any questions should you have any. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, John, and for being concise. So at this point, I will ask if there are members of the public who would like to speak to this application.
Members of the public are reminded to use the raise hand button or press *9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address the committee. Chair Alcock, I can confirm there are no hands raised.
Thank you for that, Sam. So at this point, I will read the motion before us. It has been moved by Councillor Stone, seconded by Mayor Terziano. It is recommended that Planning Committee approve zoning bylaw amendment Z17 2021 HT, changing the zoning from a shoreline residential 1 zone to a shoreline residential 1 zone with an exception 2, change the classification of fish habitat from type 1 to type 2, abutting the shoreline of this lot. Permit a maximum primary lot coverage of 15%. Permit a maximum accessory lot coverage of 7%. Permit a flat roof boathouse with a sitting area that extends 0.5 meters beyond the perimeter of the boathouse walls. Recognize the existing 16.73 meter squared shed located between the dwelling and the shoreline frontage. Reduce the northerly side yard setback from 6 meters to 2.25 meters for an attached deck. Reduce the front yard setback from 20 meters to 17.8 meters for an attached deck, and reduce the front yard setback from 20 meters to 18.74 meters for an attached 4-season sunroom. With that, I will ask if there are questions or comments from committee. Yes, Mayor Terziano.
Thanks, Chair. John, I don't know whether you have any additional pictures. It would have been nice to see some pictures of the existing structure and what the additions are to go to 15% coverage. Or is that, what's it at now? I'm trying to get a sense of how much decking and sunroom and stuff is being added there.
John, you're on mute.
Sorry, through the chair. The proposed Muskoka room is 19 meters squared. That's going over an existing deck. So that's really the structure itself. The deck is being added on a portion of it, but it's a minor addition there. So part of the issue is it's a significant decrease because my client has purchased a shore road allowance, which substantially brought down his coverage on the site over what was existing beforehand. So as far as scale, the Muskoka room is 19 meters squared. That's going over an existing deck. And then you have the shoreline structure of 93 meters.
So you're saying that the percentage of coverage pre this application was higher than 15%?
Significantly higher. That was in my report, and just it was at 33% before the closing of the shore road allowance.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Quick question, and that was, I think you made reference to it, Adam, but I've forgotten, and I apologize. The changing the classification of fish habitat from type 1 to type 2 abutting the shoreline, did that come out of an ecological assessment? I think it did, right?
That's correct, Madam Chair, it did.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? So seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Okay, and that carries unanimously. Thank you for that, John and Adam. Okay, with that, back to you, Adam. Second last report from you. That would be Report Development 2021-108, Z18 2021, Hammond, 15 Ferguson Road.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, as mentioned, the subject property is 15 Ferguson Road. The subject property is currently partially zoned Main Street West mixed use area with an exception 0382, as well as Main Street West mixed use area with no exception. The official plan designates this area as a mixed use as well as an intensification corridor. For committee's information, currently right now, the exception applies to the piece of property outlined in yellow, and the current MU1 zone is outlined in blue. However, the property is one. The applicant is proposing to amend the existing zoning to apply to the entire lands. The exception is to permit all uses in the MU1 zone and allow for the storage of school buses an additional permitted use. The way the current exception reads is that the only use permitted on the piece light in yellow is for the storage of school buses. So the applicant is looking to now allow for all uses in the MU1 zone and still retain the ability to store school buses should they choose. Through the circulation of this application, the District of Muskoka did provide comments that they would like a holding provision to be placed on the subject lands. It's for hydraulic water and wastewater monitoring to be completed. This is typical when there's an increase or a potential increase for density. So should there be a higher yield density on the subject land, some modeling would need to be done. And once that is satisfied, the removal of the holding provision would be complete. The application was circulated in accordance with the Planning Act, and one letter was received and forwarded to committee this morning. The bulk of the letter mostly talked about the mixed use commercial area in general, and that they were hoping the proposed use, whatever it may be, maintain adequate property standards and not turn into an eyesore, for lack of a better word, like neighboring properties. That report, like I had mentioned, letter was forwarded to committee for their information. The proposal is consistent with our official plan, allowing for all uses in the mixed use one zone is in keeping with the designation. Staff are also satisfied it's consistent with the PPS and are recommending that this application be approved.
Okay, thank you for that, Adam. At this point, I will ask if the applicant or their representative is here to speak to the application.
The applicant or their representative are reminded to use the raise hand button or press *9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address the committee. Chair Alcock, I can confirm we do have one hand raised, so I'll bring them into the meeting now. As a reminder, please have your microphone and video, if possible, turned on before you begin speaking. Please confirm your name and mailing address.
I'm seeing a name, but no video or, oh, here's something's happening. Video is on. You're still muted though. There we go.
Greg Hammond, 54 Brafocco Drive, Bracebridge, P1L 1C9.
Welcome.
Thank you. I have really nothing to add. I'm a little surprised at the district. We're not proposing any new development, and I would think that if there was a wastewater, something that the district required for change of use of the property, that should be addressed at the time. We're not proposing to build anything. We're just hoping to sell the property and make it more usable and a benefit to the town rather than sitting there as an empty lot.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, I'll ask if you could turn your mute on, which you just did, and just stick around because we might have questions from committee. And at this point, I will ask if there is anyone, a member of the public who would like to speak to this application.
Members of the public are reminded to use the raised hand button or press *9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address the committee. Chair Alcock, I can confirm there are no hands raised.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Sam. So at this point, I will read the motion before us. It has been moved by Councillor Armour, seconded by Councillor Stone. It is recommended that Planning Committee approve zoning bylaw amendment Z18-2021 HTE, changing the zoning from a Main Street West mixed use area zone and a Main Street West mixed use area zone with exception 0382 to a Main Street West mixed-use area holding zone with an amended exception 0382 to allow all of the permitted uses in the MU1 zone and retain the storage of school buses as an additional permitted use. And that the holding provision may be removed and development may proceed upon the Director of Development Services being satisfied that the following has been completed. That hydraulic water and wastewater modeling be completed to the satisfaction of the district, municipality of Muskoka, and that the provision of municipal water and sewer servicing is addressed to the satisfaction of the district, municipality of Muskoka. With that, I will check to see if there are any questions from committee with respect to this motion. Councillor Stone, followed by Mayor Terzian.
Just a quick one to Adam. So further to Mr. Hammond's comments, it's an empty lot. So what is the district looking for here?
Absolutely. Madam Chair, through you, I did have conversation with district staff. The way the exception was written was that really the only use that was permitted on the large part of the site was for the storage of school buses. So during allocation, it wasn't necessarily that this lot would be utilized. However, I might be speaking out of turn. They may have a threshold for number of units should residential units be proposed here. If it's under or over that, this modeling exercise is required. So if one single detached dwelling was proposed as an example, which is a permitted use in the MU1 zone, that modeling might not be necessary and the holding provision could be lifted and waived. However, if a more dense use such as a triplex or a sixplex was somehow configured on this and it was a more of a strain on water and wastewater than originally anticipated, then they would be looking for some modeling. So nothing's being requested at this time. It's really, as the applicant had mentioned, in the future really depends on what the development proposal is, and then it will be addressed there. But as a caution, they wanted to put that on there to make sure it was adequately addressed in the future.
Thanks, Adam.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that explanation. Mayor Terziano.
Thanks, Chair. Probably to Greg. So you actually own the lot and just want to sell it now, but you still want to retain the use of school bus parking? Is that?
Yes, we're not using the lot now. And it had that strange zoning on it that it was only permitted to park school buses. So we would like to sell it and make it more saleable, thus removing that as the only use of the property. But it's not our intention, but you know, who knows, maybe a year from now something changes. COVID has certainly impacted our business, and if we had to park school buses as we're permitted now, we don't want to lose that usage if we had to do that, but that's not our intention.
Thanks.
Thanks for that too. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? And that's, oh, sorry. Okay, I think I see all of the hands now. That carries anyway. Carries. Thank you very much for coming in, Greg.
Thank you.
Okay, Adam, your last report. There you are. Look at the smile on your face. That's great. With respect to 7.8 and Hares and Madden 85 Hares Road.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, as mentioned, the subject property is located at 85 Hares Road. This too is an application for both zoning, and it also has an associated consent with it as well. The subject property is currently zoned Rural 1 and is designated rural in the official plan. In support of their application for consent, which is to create 3 lots as outlined on this map, Lot 1, Lot 2, and Lot 3, the applicant is proposing to rezone a portion of the subject lands from the Rural 1 zone to a rural residential zone. There was an ecological assessment done on this to identify wetland areas. As a result, staff are recommending that those areas be put in a conservation zone, which is consistent with our official plan policies. Further to that, the exception that is to be added to the rural residential zones is to ensure that site plan is implemented on those lots to implement those recommendations. Further, it was identified that there is a cold water stream on the subject lands, and we are also recommending that that feature be put in a conservation zone as well. For committee's information, I've also included this map. The blackened areas are the pieces to be rezoned RR. The areas that are hatched are the identified wetlands that came from the environmental assessment, and this linear hatched area is outlining the aforementioned stream. Staff are satisfied that with the proposed zoning, the proposal is both consistent with our official plan policies as well as the provincial policy statement. The application was circulated in accordance with the Planning Act, and at the time of the writing of this report, no comments or objections were received. We have received a few phone calls and emails, but no one has submitted anything in writing. It was usually just asking questions about what was going on in the neighborhood. As a result, staff are recommending the application be approved, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thanks again for the concise report, Adam. I will ask if the applicant or the representative is here to speak to the application.
The applicant or their representative are reminded to use the raised hand button or press star 9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address the committee. And Chair Alcock, I can confirm we do have one hand raised. So I'll bring them into the meeting now. As a reminder, please have your microphone and video if possible turned on before you begin speaking, and please do confirm your name and mailing address.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Rick Madden, 85 Hares Road. I'm both an applicant, but I'm also representing my wife and her parents on this application as well. We've worked with the town planning staff for the past year. Both Richard and Adam have been great help and very responsive, so we appreciate that very much. We have no concerns with any of the recommendations. We made several adjustments over the past year and taken direction from staff. And tried to be as supportive as we can to meet what the town objectives are with regards to their official plan. So with that said, I've got nothing else to add. Just here for questions if I have to answer any. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much for appearing today and stay with us in case there are questions from committee. So at this point, I will ask if there's a member of the public who would like to speak to this application.
Members of the public are reminded to use the raised hand button or press star 9 on their telephone to indicate that they would like to address the committee. Chair Alcock, I can confirm there are no hands raised.
Okay, thanks for that, Sam. And with that, I will read the motion before us. It has been moved by Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Mayor Terziano. It is recommended that Planning Committee approve zoning bylaw amendment Z20 2021 HT, the purpose and effect of which is to change the zoning from a rural 1 zone to a rural residential zone with an exception and a conservation zone as outlined in attachment 4 to this report to permit the creation of 3 new rural residential lots. And with that, I will ask if there are questions from committee. Okay, I have one quick one, and that is, I know this area reasonably well. It's a fantastic piece of property, and part of it is that it has this extraordinary wetland area, several of them, as noted, Adam, in your report. And I'm really thrilled to see that you've identified those as conservation, and I appreciate the applicant being part of that, so that's great. So one quick question, and that is with respect to lot 3, which is where there's a bit of the conservation zone carved out of that. And that is the area that I think is a really significant wetland. Can you repeat for me, Adam, will there be a fairly tight site plan control on the identification of a building lot on that? And what would the setback be from that conservation zone?
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. So in response to that, The zoning that's being placed on all 3 lots will require them all to go through site plan control, and that's to implement the recommendations of the environmental impact assessment. In the zoning schedule that shows the areas that are hatched, that already includes the recommended buffer areas outlined in the environmental report. So all lands that are being zoned conservation include that buffer area, and for all intents and purposes will be a no-touch zone. The other areas outlined in black will be the building envelopes, and all other provisions of the RR zone with respect to setbacks to side yards and front yards will need to be maintained. But the site plan process will ensure that those are upheld.
Great, that's great. Thank you. I wanted to hear that. And it looks like the building, the lots themselves, there's lots of room for building sites. Okay, perfect. That's it from me. And one last, no other questions or comments? I will call the question. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you very much, Rick, for appearing before us today. And Adam, thank you for all of your reports today. That was excellent, and each one really concise. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
All right. So with that, end of public meetings. We are now at the end of public meetings. So now that all comments have been received, I declare these public meetings respecting the above applications to be concluded. We will now move to the non-public portion of the meeting. And if the applicant or their agent wishes to make comments regarding their application on the 2 applications before us, please raise your hand after the staff presentation so that we know that you would like to make a comment. And with that, I will turn it over with 8.1 to Richard with respect to the Chamberlain 49 Bridgedale Crescent application.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, the subject property is located at 49 Bridgedale Crescent. The lot has an approximate area of 3,716 meters squared, with 61 meters of frontage on Bridgedale Crescent. The lands are zoned residential 1 and are designated community residential in the official plan. The lands are also within the Port Sydney Community Settlement Area. The applicant is proposing to create 1 new residential lot by severing the lot in half. A concurrent consent application was submitted to create the new residential lot with an approximate area of 1,858 meters squared and 30.5 meters of frontage on Bridgedale Crescent. The severed lot is on the north half. The retained lands would be on the south half, and they would have an identical area and frontage and contain the existing 180.8 meter squared dwelling. It should be noted that this application was the concurrent consent application was conditionally approved by the Committee of Adjustment this morning. The zoning bylaw amendment application that's before Planning Committee today is to facilitate the lot creation by changing the zoning on the lot from a residential 1 zone to a residential 1 zone with an exception to reduce the required frontage from 60 to 30 meters and reduce the required lot area from 1 hectare to 18.58 meters square. Community settlement areas represent areas of Huntsville where intensification, redevelopment, and regeneration are encouraged. To maintain community character in the community residential designation and ensure lots are sufficiently sized to accommodate private individual on-site water services, official plan policies specify minimum lot frontage of 30 meters and a minimum lot area of 0.4 hectares. In this instance, the proposal will establish new lot requirements that meet the minimum frontage standard, but not lot area. However, the proposed lot areas are similar to several lots existing in the surrounding neighborhood. A public meeting relating to this application occurred last summer on July 21st, 2020. And at that time, a recommendation from staff was considered premature given outstanding technical matters relating to wetland identification and protection, wildland fire hazard mitigation, and sustainable accommodation of private individual on-site water and sewage services. These matters were all considered important given the potentially constrained nature of the site and the deficient lot area proposed. A memo prepared by Frycorp Ecological Services has since been submitted to address concerns relating to wetland identification and protection, and a memo prepared by Duke Engineering was prepared and submitted to address concerns related to site suitability from a servicing perspective. The Frycorp memo documented conditions on site supported by borehole analysis that found no evidence of soils that are indicative of wetlands in the locations of the proposed septic system or in the location of the rear lot line. A precautionary approach was agreed upon to ensure that potential wetlands to the rear of the proposed severed lot, as mapped on Schedule C of the official plan, would be adequately protected through special site-specific provisions in the zoning bylaw. And I didn't read through them, but this site-specific provisions that are being requested in this instance are on screen. And the one I'm referring to there is a 5-meter wide vegetative buffer that should be maintained along the rear lot line in order to protect the adjacent wetlands. While I'm on the subject, as a result of the last public meeting, committee heard concerns from the adjacent neighbor regarding potential for impacts on their privacy as a result of this application, and indicated that they would prefer if there was a requirement for a vegetative screening buffer. So staff is also recommending a 3-meter wide vegetative screening buffer along the